Good morning. We're going to bring this Interim Finance Committee, the first of our interim and the last of this fiscal year, to order this morning. And Ms. Kaufman, could you please call the roll?
Assemblywoman Benitez Thompson.
Here.
Assemblywoman Gorlow.
Here.
Assemblyman Hafen. Assemblywoman Howdegay.
Here.
Assemblyman Levitt.
Here.
Assemblywoman Miller.
Here.
Assemblywoman Monroe Moreno.
Here.
Assemblywoman Peters.
Here.
Assemblyman Roberts.
Here.
Assemblywoman Titus.
Here.
Assemblywoman Tolles.
Here.
Vice Chair Carlton. Here. Senator Dennis.
Here.
Senator Harris for Senator Canizaro.
Here.
Senator Don Deralu.
Here.
Senator Goycochea.
Here.
Senator Hammond.
Here.
Senator Kekeffer.
Here.
Senator Ratty.
Here.
Senator Severs-Gansert.
Here.
And I apologize, Assemblyman Miller, I apologize, I didn't catch you on the assembly side.
No problem. Here.
And Chair Brooks.
Here, thank you. And I think we have Assemblyman Yeager as well.
Thank you.
You're better at this.
He's easy to forget.
Thank you.
He's running.
Welcome, Dynasty.
And before we get started on our agenda, there are just a few housekeeping rules. Since we've got several members are joining via Zoom, when we take motions and then vote on the motion today, we'll just do instead of doing an individual roll call vote, we'll do yays and nays. And as we did back in the legislative session, if I could please ask the legislators participating via Zoom to just raise your hand for the yays or raise your hand for the nays, and then that way we can kind of expedite the process instead of going through a roll call. And that will bring us to our first agenda item, which is public comment this morning. And in our agenda, as was posted and what you should have online right now, is all the information necessary to call in for public comment. So first I'll start with the folks in the room, and then I'll go to anyone who's on public comment on Zoom, and then we'll finish by going to the phones. Please keep your public comment to 2 minutes so that we can move through our agenda this morning. So please come on up to the table for public comment if you're in the room.
Good morning. Professor Doug Unger, D-O-U-G, U-N-G-E-R, representing Southern Nevada faculty for the Nevada Faculty Alliance and the UNLV Employee Benefits Advisory Committee. I just want to say how wonderful it is to see everyone up so close and sitting so closely. It's like a signal that our state is coming back to normal after everything we've lived through in the pandemic. I represent a part of the 44,000 active employees for the state of Nevada and the 70,000 plus covered lives. In the closing of SB 451 on the floor of the Assembly, Chair Carlton indicated that there might be a conversation about the Public Employee Benefits Program, which has come out of the 81st session with some cuts that are going to be deeply felt after July 1st. Particularly the higher out-of-pocket maximums that are going to affect the 12% of state employees who have chronic health conditions and have to pay high prescription costs, and the 40 to 50% who hit that high deductible, which has gone higher, plus life insurance being cut in half, and the elimination of long-term disability insurance is going to affect a few, but a very important few colleagues. In agenda item L5, this committee is going to accept, I presume, more than $2.7 billion in American Rescue Plan funds. We feel that, we hope, that you can put on the agenda of this committee a conversation about restoring PEB. Minimum would be the $25 million that was taken back in the AB3 special session last summer, which is 0.91 cents of the American Rescue Plan funds. To restore the plan completely would be twice that much, 1.8 cents, which would restore the plan and keep up with the 4.6% medical inflation. I hope that this committee can really move forward and have the conversation about restoring PEB funds. We've checked with the U.S. Treasury guidelines, we've checked with our congressional delegations and with several attorneys, and we believe that within those guidelines, the restoration of this kind of budget is not only permissible, it's prioritized. Thanks very much for your consideration, and thank you so much for your service in the last session and on this committee. Thank you.
Thank you. And do we have anyone else in the room? So could we check and see if we have anyone on Zoom for public comment, please?
Thank you, Chair. To participate in public comment, please press star now to take your place in the queue. Will the caller with the last three digits, 338, please slowly state and spell your name for the record? You may begin.
Good morning, Chair Brooks, Co-Chair Carlton, and members of the committee. This is Priscilla Maloney, Priscilla speaking on behalf this morning of the AFSCME retirees. And I would just like to echo everything said on the behalf of the Nevada Faculty Alliance by Dr. Unger, and refer you to the excellent exhibit that specifically lays out more details of what the coalition partners for the PEB program advocates are asking for today. And just thank the committee for their service in this extraordinary time as a legislative body, and appreciate the work you will be doing, which is going to be a big lift. As everyone knows, this is an enormous amount of money. But as Dr. Unger pointed out, we have some specific roadmaps on what to do in Senate Bill 461, subsection 1, subsection 2, subsection G, subsection 1, and would love to embody the first sentence, I believe, in that bill, which is as soon as is practicable. We recognize the enormous administrative task ahead. We thank you for your consideration in this matter. I would put on for the record that at the PEB board meeting of July 11th, one thing that was concerning to the advocates is that PEB had not yet formulated a plan to make their specific request for the American Recovery Plan Act funds, and we urge them to have a plan in place by their next board meeting, which will be July 22nd. So thank you very much for your hard work, committee, and please all stay safe now that we're out and about in the great state of Nevada. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Maloney. Do we have any other callers on public comment?
Thank you, Chair. Will the caller with the last three digits, 244, please slowly state and spell your name for the record? You have 2 minutes.
Good morning, members of the Interim Committee. For the record, my name is Victor Salcido with the Charter School Association of Nevada. I'm calling in this morning because I felt it necessary to bring something to your attention. In the recently concluded legislative session, there was a lot of effort and time spent in ensuring that the transition to the new funding formula for public education would not cause any harm to any student in our state. A lot of people put a lot of work into ensuring that. The legislative intent on that point was very clear. Unfortunately, I'm here today because as we came out of session and schools have been trying to put budgets together for the new school year, we're finding out that there are many more schools who will see a decrease in their per pupil funding when compared to 2020. Many of them will see decreases of hundreds of dollars per pupil. If you recall, SB 463 was passed because there was 12 schools identified as being in this hold harmless position or in this harmed position. An extra bill was deemed necessary to get them, make them whole. Unfortunately, we're coming to the conclusion that there are many more schools that were in similar positions that were not identified as such. The point is that schools are being harmed, kids are being harmed in this transition. I know that was never the intent, but that's what's happening. We look forward to working with you to help find a solution to this situation, and we appreciate your time and effort. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Salcido. Do we have any other callers in public comment?
Thank you, Chair. For the caller with the last three digits, 111, please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You may begin.
Good morning. My name is Janelle Woodward, JANELLWOODWARD. I'm a state worker at the Division of Emergency Management, as well as an AFSCME Local 4041 member. I want to thank you for all that has been done regarding PEB and PERS this year. But the recent cuts and changes to our public employee health benefits were disheartening, to say the least. For those of us with serious health conditions, especially myself as a cancer survivor, these changes have serious impacts to my ability to maintain my health. Transferring costs to employees creates a tremendous financial hardship. Cancer is a lifetime fight. This was an incredibly difficult past year and a half, and it was disappointing to find that after all the cuts, PEB still has a large surplus, and we are getting the American Rescue Plan funds, which are precisely to recoup those budget shortfalls, yet the legislature only gave a 1-month premium holiday, which is truly a pittance compared to the damage that has been done to our healthcare benefits. As everyone is aware, state employees work for much lower wages than our city and county counterparts, but the trade-off is supposed to be the benefits that we get. State employees are happy to work for less because we love our jobs, but to those benefits for to lose those benefits for no good reason is just showing the state's lack of appreciation for the work that state employees do. I know this has never been done before, but I would ask each of you to please think seriously about reinstating employee benefits. We are in a unique position to be able to provide this to employees. I would ask also that you repay employees for the 6 furlough days that were required and subsequently not needed with the ARP. This would go a long way to help state employees, and it's the right thing to do. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Ms. Woodward. Do we have any other callers in public comment?
Thank you, Chair. If you have recently joined the call, we are on public comment. Please press *9 now to take your place in the queue. Will the caller with the last three digits, 419, please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You have 2 minutes and you may begin.
Thank you, Chair Brooks, Vice Chair, and members of the committee. My name is Benjamin Challoner. That's BenjaminChalllinor, and I am the Policy Director for Faith in Action Nevada. I am here to speak about the American Rescue Plan Act funds that the committee will be approving and accepting, and in particularly the in support of disadvantaged communities, are Black, Brown, Indigenous, immigrant, and communities of color and low-income communities were disproportionately affected by the COVID-19 pandemic, and we must do as much as we can to make sure that we are not only making them whole, but making sure that we are able to get them better than they were before. We're encouraged by the Every Nevadan Recovery Framework as part of the public input, and we look forward to make sure that our organization and other stakeholders who work directly with these disadvantaged communities are part of the conversation to make sure that we are able to get them there. Thank you so much for your opportunity.
Thank you, Mr. Challoner. Do we have any other callers in public comment?
Thank you, Chair. Will the caller with the last three digits, 499, please slowly state and spell your name for the record? You have 2 minutes and you may begin.
For the record, Carter Bundy with AFSCME, CARTERBUNDY. I don't want to be repetitive with some of the previous comments, but we were heavily involved in trying to pass state and local aid, not just in the last few months, but going all the way back to the CARES Act. We knew that there would need to be other rounds to make up for the devastating loss of revenue that Nevada suffered, almost worse than anyone else. State employees did obviously take hits at multiple levels, not the least of which has been to PEB. So we do hope that we think one of the express purposes of ARP funding is to make up for cuts that had to happen during the pandemic. We thank the legislature for the work that they have done to try to ease some of that transition with the premium holiday, but we do hope that you'll use some of these ARP funds to restore the cuts that were made to PEB, and some of which we think we can be done even mid-year, but certainly in time for FY23. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Bundy. Do we have anyone else in public comment?
Thank you, Chair. Will the caller with the last three digits, 170, please slowly state and spell your name for the record? You have 2 minutes and you may begin.
Good morning, Chair, members of the committee. I am Daphne De Leon, DAPHNE, DE, capital LEON. I have been a state employee for more than 14 years, and I'm also a member of Local 4041 AFSCME. I'm here today to talk to you about the PEB restoration, possible restoration with the ARP money, and not to repeat what everyone else has said, because I agree with Professor Unger and also with my fellow members from AFSCME, but specifically to talk about my situation. When I came to Nevada, one of the reasons I took my position was because it offered benefits for me and my young kids, my family. And to look at the PEB cuts that are on the table now for fiscal year 2022, it would have made it extremely difficult for me to start my career with state because of those cuts to the HMO specifically. We no longer have an HMO. So I urge you all to do the right thing and to support the public employees that you have here working for you in the state, and to recognize that when we as state employees and our families are held whole, we provide better service. We provide better service to Nevadans who want to get back to work, and we are more able to support our communities, to have vibrant communities throughout Nevada. So I urge you once again to restore the PEB cuts with the ARP funding. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms.
Thank you,
DeLeon.
caller.
Do we have any other callers?
Thank you, Chair. Will the caller with the last three digits, 339, please slowly state and spell your name for the record? You have 2 minutes and you may begin.
My name is Cedric Williams, Cedric, C-E-D-R-I-C, last name Williams, W-I-L-L-I-A-M-S. I am wanting to thank our chair, Brooks, and the committee. I appreciate all that you do, and it's understood that there's a lot of work that goes into exactly what you're doing during these legislative sessions. But I'm also an AFSCME member. I'm the president of my local chapter here, the Share Range chapter, but I'm also a state Nevada employee. And I've stated before that as a state Nevada employee, especially with the Division of Welfare and Supportive Services, you know, many of my coworkers, we often hold that conversation of how is it that our members, our clients that we are evaluating for benefits, especially when it comes to Medicaid, are getting better benefits than we are as state Nevada employees. You know, I also wanted to bring to the table, you know, in repeating some of the things that have been stated, our union fought hard for the American Rescue Plan to include aid to state and local governments because public services are important in our collective recovery, from this pandemic. With that also in mind, I I'm almost at a loss because it seems like as my 10 years with the state of Nevada, every legislative session, it appears that you are trying to increase our premiums and then give us less benefits for the premiums that we're paying. I don't want to say that our voices are falling on deaf ears, but it kind of appears that way. Please listen, respectively. And that's all I've got to say. Thank you.
Thank you, caller. Will the caller with the last three digits, 720, please slowly state and spell your name for the record? You have 2 minutes and you may begin.
Thank you. Good morning. For the record, Carrie Harrington, that is CARIHERINGTON, Executive Director for Nevada Cancer Coalition. We are also in support of item L, specific to the American Rescue Plan Act funds. Partners across the state are already working together with the State of Nevada Division of Public and Behavioral Health to address Nevadans who are disproportionately affected by the pandemic. In the case of cancer, our cancer screening rates have dropped drastically. Many treatments were postponed, and this has just left many of our communities in a really tough situation. Our partners are working together diligently to change this across the state, and this funding is so critical and extremely important to our work and that of our public health partners in meeting the needs of our disadvantaged communities. Thank you so much for your consideration.
Thank you, caller. As a reminder, we are in public comment. Please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue. Will the caller with the last three digits, 035, please slowly state and spell your name for the record? You have 2 minutes and you may begin.
Good morning, Chair Brooks and members of the committee. For the record, my name is Quentin Savoy. That's Quentin, S like Sam, A like Apple, V like Victor, WOIR. I'm the Deputy Director at Make It Work Nevada, where we build power alongside Black women and Black families. I'm calling today in reference to agenda item L and the receipt of $2.7 billion in American Rescue Plan money. As you all well know, communities of color, our families, community members that look like me, were disproportionately impacted by the effects of COVID-19. Not just the virus itself, but the economic fallout. Rent prices continue to go up. Childcare is increasingly unaffordable and out of reach for so many of the families that we work alongside. So as you receive these federal dollars, I want you to keep in mind what infrastructure really looks like and reimagine what infrastructure can be. Because families are infrastructure. Affordable childcare is infrastructure. Paid sick days is infrastructure. And if we invest in our families now, we won't have nearly as much of a negative impact when the next pandemic hits our state. So please receive these dollars and consider the families that this directly impacted, and even consider going a step further to invest in them so that we're better prepared next time. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you, caller. If you have recently joined, we are in public comment. Please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue. Will the caller with the last three digits, 960, please slowly state and spell your name for the record? You have 2 minutes and you may begin.
Good morning, committees. My name is Peggy Bowen, P-E-G-G-Y, B as in boy, O, H as in Howard, N as in Nancy. As a longtime state employee, I've been with you for over 27 years. This is not my first time going down this road to try and ask for something to be restored as far as pay or benefits. I am also an AFSCME Local 4041 member and a U.S. Army veteran. And instead of repeating everything that everyone else has said, I just want to ask for your consideration and respect to state employees to restore whatever you can for those of us who have stayed on the front lines working with you and alongside you for the last 18 months and prior. And keep in mind that the health benefits also include the mental health portion of our benefits. And many of our state employees have had some mental health issues and may have long-term mental health issues, unfortunately, due to this pandemic. So I ask you for your consideration and respect to all of us fellow state employees, and do what you can to restore what you can. And thank you for all that you have done, and God bless you all. Have a great day.
Thank you, caller. Will the caller with the last three digits, 237, please slowly state and spell your name for the record? You have 2 minutes and you may begin.
Hello, my name is Marlene Lockard, Lockard, representing retired public employees of Nevada. We would like to echo the comments made by previous callers and ask that you restore the PEB benefits that have been cut during the legislative process. We understand the difficult decisions you have to make going forward and appreciate the restoration that was made during the session. So we would like to commend you all for your hard work and your work during the session and would appreciate your consideration. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Lockard. And I believe that's our last caller on the phone, but I do think we have one public comment on Zoom. So if we could, BPS, if we could see who our public commenter is on Zoom right now.
Mr. Chairman?
Go ahead, please.
Mr. Chairman, my name is Stephen J. Klubeck. I'm the new chairman of the Nevada State Athletic Commission. I used to and was the founding chairman of Brand USA, the head of tourism for the United States, and I'm proud to be back in our state representing this great commission. I also offered to this body my wealth of knowledge, being the founding chairman and CEO of Diamond Resorts. I love my state, and I'm very proud to serve. I also want to commend the great management team the Nevada State Athletic Commission has shown during the very rough time. And we look forward to a bright future, adding tremendous revenue to the state. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Klubeck. And do we have anyone else? I believe that's it for our public comment this morning. And we can move to our next agenda items, which are our minutes. And so we've got 3 sets of minutes here, agenda items C, D, and E. And it's the minutes from July 14th, 2020, the minutes from July 29th, 2020, and the minutes from August 20th, 2020. And do any of the members of the committee have any comments to make on those agenda items or any revisions or corrections? All right, seeing none, I would be interested in taking a motion on all 3 of those. I have a motion from Assemblywoman Danielle Moreno. I have a second from Senator Dennis. Any discussion on that motion? All right, seeing none, all in favor, aye? Aye. And if you could raise your hands. All right, so all opposed, nay? So I see no one in opposition, so the motion passes unanimously with the members present. And that takes us to our next agenda item, which would be agenda item F, and that is our work program revisions in accordance with NRS 353.220. And this is an informational only item, but Mr. Thorley, if you could walk us through that agenda item. as well as, I believe, we can do that, G and O, and see if we have any other items to pull.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. For List F, there are 3 work programs that required expeditious action within 15 days. None of the work programs on List F have been identified for additional discussion. Moving on to List G. On page 2 of List G, I would just note that item G11 has been withdrawn. Moving on to page 3 of List G, agenda items 14 and 16 have been identified for additional discussion and will be heard together. Agenda item 17, G17, has also been identified for additional discussion. Lastly, on page 3, regarding agenda item 18, there is a revision that has been requested by the agency. However, this is a second revision. You'll note on the list that there was already a revision reducing the transfer amount to $246,500. The agency has requested a second revision to reduce the transfer from the reserve category to the charter school loan category of $162,500. This is because the Sage Collegiate Charter School will not be opening in FY22. Therefore, there would only be one loan from the loan program for the Teach Las Vegas Charter School. So again, the agency is requesting a revision to that work program to $162,500. Moving on to page 4. Item G24 has been identified for additional discussion. Then on to page 5 of List G. Item G25 has also been identified for additional discussion. Next, on page 7 of List G, item 39 has been identified for additional discussion. This item relates to item G60 on the agenda, and both 39 and 60 will be heard together. Moving on to page 8 of List G. At the bottom of page 8, item 48 has been identified for additional discussion. And then on the top of page 9, item 49 has also been identified for additional discussion. Both these work program revision requests are from the Aging and Disability Services Autism Treatment Assistance Program, and 48 and 49 will be heard together. On page 11, I'll just note again, item 60 has been identified for additional discussion, and again, item 60 relates to G39 and will be heard jointly with G39. On page 12 of List G, item 65 has been identified for additional discussion. I will note that there is a revised amount on the list, revising the request to $4.9 million. Skipping ahead to page 18 of List G. Regarding item 105, The agency has requested a revision that is not reflected on the agenda. The current work program revision request is to transfer $60,000 from the personnel services category to the psychosexual evaluations category. The revised request from the agency would add $55,000 to the transfer request for a total transfer of $115,000 from the personnel services category to the psychosexual evaluations category. The next item is on page 22 of List G. Number 126, Health and Human Services, Public and Behavioral Health, Public Health Preparedness Program. That has been identified for additional discussion. And that's it for List G. List O, or I'm sorry, Q. He doesn't want to hear them. Back on List G, agenda items 132, and G132 and G133 contain various work programs allocating coronavirus relief funds. Both those items will be pulled for additional discussion. So that's G132 and 133. Agenda item Q is the informational items. There is a list of attached to the agenda that lists out all the informational items, and none of the items on list Q have been identified for additional discussion. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Thorley. Do any of the members have any other items that they would like to see pulled from any of those? Senator Gokachia.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. If we can pull 98, I just got a quick question on that.
Thank you. So that's G98. Any other members have any other items that they would like to get pulled? What about our members on Zoom? Any items that we need to pull? All right, thank you. All right, so we'll add G98 to that list. All right, so if you want to go through that. So we've pulled those items, and I would take a motion to approve all other items under item G, and except for the ones that we've pulled for further discussion. So I have a motion from Vice Chair Carlton. I have a second from Senator Dennis. Do we have any discussion on that motion? All right, seeing none, all in favor, aye. Aye. And all of the Zoom members had their hands up, so all opposed, nay. So the motion passes unanimously with the members present. and we can move into item G, our items that we are going to have further discussion on. And so we will start with, we'll take them in order, I think, and we'll start with item 11 from the Department of Administration. Oh, excuse me, I'm sorry, that one's withdrawn. So it would be item 14, 16, and 17. And we'll take 14 and 16 together, and that's from the Department of Education, from the Office of the Superintendent.
Good morning, Mr. Chair. Superintendent Ebert, for the record, would you like us to do an overview of items 14 and 16?
Yeah, that would be great. And broadcast services, we cannot see them, but if there's if we could cycle over to them on the screen, that'd be great. Perfect. Now we can. Yes, please get started whenever you want. Good morning, Superintendent Ebert.
Good morning. For the record, I'm Heidi Hartz, and I serve as the Deputy Superintendent for the Student Investment Division in the Nevada Department of Education. The first Department of Education work program before you today requests expenditure authority for $431,497 in the superintendent's budget account. These funds are intended to support the costs associated with a new state position that the Department of Education would like to establish and utilize for the duration of the ARP-ESSER funding period. The position that has been requested is an education program supervisor that would be responsible for overseeing the programmatic and evaluation initiatives that will be developed in conjunction with the receipt of these federal funds. We would note that the work program does obligate all of the funds associated with the cost of this position through the end of January 2024. The funds for fiscal year 2022 are reflected in the expense categories, and the balance would be placed into reserve until the next fiscal year. We do recognize that this position will end when the federal funds end, which is consistent with existing budget policy for the state and all federally funded positions. With that, we'd be happy to answer any more questions regarding this work program.
Thank you, Ms. Hartz. I appreciate that. And I think our first question will come from Senator Dennis.
Thank you, Superintendent. One of the items that you have on here is an audit contract for $10 million with an external audit firm. Can you talk about how that's going to assist you and the administration in the funding of the ARP Act?
Heidi Hartz, for the record. First, I apologize to the committee. The position I previously mentioned would end in January of 2025. And then the second work program does request expenditure authority for additional funds to be funded through ARP-ESSER. Senator Dennis, with respect to your question, we are requesting funds so that we can enter into a contractual agreement with an external auditing firm so that they can conduct audits of our subrecipients and contractors on an independent basis and assist the Department of Education. We don't currently have the capacity to conduct audits for these federal funds, and we want to make sure that we do everything possible to ensure that the funds are appropriately expended and reimbursed, not only meeting the requirements of the federal government that pertain to the ARP-ESSER funds, but also the funding requirements within the state of Nevada. We believe that the use of an independent audit firm will allow us to fulfill this purpose.
Mr. Chair, follow-up. Thank you. So this amount, the 10 million, is that just an amount that you're just putting out there? You haven't actually gone out yet to figure out what that's going to be, or is that based on past expenditures?
Heidi Hartz, for the record. We did reach out to several audit firms to try to collect some very high-level information. We certainly didn't want to become too specific and potentially jeopardize the solicitation process moving forward. Based on the information that we received from 3 firms that we reached out to, it seemed reasonable to estimate approximately $5 million a year, understanding that the federal funds are available for more than just the 2 fiscal years that we've currently budgeted for. Certainly, in the event that we are able to go through the solicitation process and a contract can be secured for a lesser amount, then the department would look to reinvest any unobligated funds in other projects and priorities across the state.
Great, thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Hart. So I just want to verify what I think I heard. So you haven't got an amount yet from a vendor on exactly what an audit would cost, and you are planning to, if in the event that the audit was less than this $10 million identified, using what other monies were left over on other things not audit related?
Heidi Hartz, for the record, that is correct. The department is unable to initiate the solicitation process through the state purchasing division until we have budgetary authority to move forward with that solicitation. So while we were waiting for approval from the Interim Finance Committee to receive and expend these funds for this purpose, we did try to gather some preliminary information from audit firms about the costs that might be associated with an audit of this scope and over this period of time. And yes, if we are able to contract with an audit firm to perform the audits that we envision for an amount less than the $10 million available, then the department would reinvest those dollars in other projects. And certainly we would notify you through your staff of that change.
Thank you, Ms. Hartz. Any other questions on this particular item?
Yes.
Vice Chair Carlton.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Hartz. So if in looking at this, and we appreciate the fact that you haven't gone out to bid yet. So it's kind of difficult to figure out where you're going to go. And knowing full well on our side of the coin, our audit division is going to look at what these auditors do too. So it's going to get at least 2 looks. Instead of doing the whole $10 million right now, since you're not sure you're going to be able to spend it all, and you want to be able to at least get a running start at it, if we were to allocate the first $5 million for the first year, knowing your RFP's got to go out, it's going to take time to get that filled. So this isn't going to start July 1st. This is going to start further into the fiscal year. If we started with the first amount of money, and then after you had a contract, you could bring the contract back, we could have conversations about it, see what the components are and what the workload looks like, see what the real amount might be, and then have further discussions about the other dollars and where we would like to see those dollars go. So was there any consideration to a process like that? So that we want you to have the money in the bank to be able to go out to RFP, but I'm a bit concerned we're just giving you, we're using the word tranche a lot lately, the tranche of money, and then if there's some left over, you're going to spend it. That's typically not how we work with work programs. Money would come back to us. We would have a discussion on where those dollars should be reallocated.
Heidi Hartz, for the record, our intent in putting forward this request to contract with an outside audit firm is something that we invested a great deal of time considering what was the best approach. Our preference was to offer a multi-year contract so that we could be as efficient as possible with the contracting process and also potentially broaden the number of vendors that would respond to a multi-year contract. Certainly, we're looking for expenditure authority so we can start the solicitation process. And if the contract were to be negotiated for an amount less than what's available, and I would note that the Department of Education has been working with all of our vendors, particularly related to COVID-19 federal funds, to invest wisely and strategically, and to be as conservative with our investments as possible. If we didn't expend or obligate the full $10 million, we would be happy to come back to the Interim Finance Committee with a new proposal so that you have a chance to vet that as well. We appreciate your interest in how these funds are invested, and we look forward to the ongoing partnership.
And thank you, Ms. Hartz, for the answer. And knowing full well this will have to go through the board. Typically, it would go through the Board of Examiners process and come to us, and we would do it that way. But we understand the uniqueness of this work program and the situation. But, you know, Mr. Chairman, my inclination would be to do the first round of money, have them go out, get those contracts, come back to us, have a conversation, knowing full well we're going to be meeting every 6 to 8 weeks, possibly even more, depending upon how these federal dollars sift through all the state budgets, and have a conversation about that so that we make sure any dollars that are left over go to some of the other really important programs that we need to fund through the Department of Education. So that would be my inclination.
Thank you, Vice Chair Carlton. A question for you, Ms. Hartz. So you're looking to enter into a multi-year contract with the audit firm, and did you state that there was a restriction on entering into a multi-year contract unless there was multi-year funding in place to enter into that contract?
Heidi Hartz, for the record. I believe that if the Interim Finance Committee were to approve only funding for the first year of a contract, that the department could work with state purchasing through the solicitation and contracting process to indicate that the contract could be extended for additional years should additional funds become available. So that would at least notify possible vendors that there is the opportunity for the contract to be extended.
Thank you. Appreciate that. I have another question from Senator Dondero Loop.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm just trying to clarify what I heard said by Vice Chair Carlton and Chair Brooks. So am I understanding that we would allocate money for the first year and then come back and reallocate money for the second year? And with that being said, Ms. Hartz confirmed that we could get someone in place with that type of a proposal that they would be willing to do a second year if need be and funds were available. Am I understanding that?
Heidi Hartz, for the record. I believe if the department were to work with the purchasing division to begin the solicitation process, we would indicate that this is a one-year contract for the amount of money that the Interim Finance Committee authorizes the department to obligate up to that amount of money. The solicitation in the contract could include language that would then indicate that it is possible that the contract could be extended for additional years and for additional funds. The department does have contracts in place currently that include similar language, so that is not outside of our customary business practices.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Hartz. And we have a question from Assemblywoman Benitez Thompson, please.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Chairman, for the question. So I just wanted to make sure I kind of had the time frame right. I heard you make a statement, Ms. Hartz, about the audits that you envision. And so I believe that your department has already submitted to the federal government some of the reports on those first CARES dollars programs that were released. And so I guess what I was trying to think was, would the audits to be a look back on reports that had been submitted to this point and then going forward, or is it only for reports that had not yet been done, and making sure then that the audits are supporting information that you would make public going forward? So kind of like your own internal audits of those dollars, then in kind of helping to form the reports that are going to be made public. Is that what we would expect?
Heidi Hartz, for the record. The intent of the external auditors is that they would audit all subrecipients and contractors to confirm that the expenses that have been processed through the ARP-ESSER funds were reasonable and appropriate and within alignment with federal and state laws and regulations. They would be limited to projects and activities funded through ARP-ESSER. The audit results would be utilized to benefit and to protect the Department of Education and the state of Nevada to ensure that we're not reimbursing our subrecipients or our contractors for disallowed expenses. So this would be separate from the reports that we already provide to the federal government.
Okay, so this will have nothing to do with the reports that come to the legislature. This is your subgrantees. And thank you for that clarification. So you have no one, your office right now doesn't do any of that work, I guess, or how would that work look different with, because when I think of an auditor, I'm thinking of kind of your traditional hire someone to do a look back of your spending in the prior set period of time, prior year, let's say, or prior quarter. But this sounds more like kind of going forward. So before you make those payments to subgrantees, the use of those dollars will be audited, and then if verified, payment will go forward? Or is it going to be the retro or the prospective?
Heidi Hartz for the record. Currently within the Department of Education, we reimburse our subrecipients for services or expenditures incurred. The audit firms would then go back and confirm in more detail that the expenditures submitted for reimbursement are in compliance with state and federal laws and regulations specific to these funds. The Department of Education does have an audit team. They audit selected federal grants and state grants in each fiscal year. They also audit our enrollment records to confirm that we have accurate enrollment data when we make payments through the distributive school account. Because the ARP-ESSER funds represent $1.5 billion of new federal funds, we do not have the capacity to adequately and thoroughly audit those grants in addition to the work that we already have in place. We also appreciate the opportunity to have an external audit firm conduct this process for the department and to help us better inform the processes that we use to work with our subrecipients and our vendors when we review their requests for reimbursement and to ensure that if there are opportunities to avoid the potential of future audit findings, we'd like to be as proactive as possible.
Thank you, Ms. Hartz. Senator Darrell Loop.
Thank you very much. And I just, once again, want to confirm we have 1.5 billion. Is that what you said, Ms. Hartz, coming in? And so I'm sort of doing some math here because I know that the department has lost several positions over the last, I would say, 5 or 6 years. And I just am going to go to bat here a little bit for them because I feel like this is about, I don't know, maybe 1%. And I totally appreciate what's being said and don't have a problem with us doing it in 2 steps. But I do think it's important for the transparency for us to have someone in place for that amount of money that we are bringing into the state. So thank you.
Assemblywoman Miller.
Thank you, Chair Brooks. I would like some clarification on the positions because I'm trying to see clearly where the positions fit in with this idea about the auditing. So with the education's program supervisor, I believe that's the position that you mentioned, Ms. Hartz, earlier, that it would expire, and I heard 2 different dates, whether it's January 2024 or September 30th, 2024, and then there was a 2025 thrown in there. So that's my first question, because I only need brief responses for this. So if you could tell me which date that would expire on, and also is this the position that would be Because in our notes, it says that they're working with vendors and contractors and school districts. So are they the ones working with the audit team? Because I'm trying to figure out if this position is separate or if they're the ones that are working alongside the audit team. And if this position is set to expire because of the funds, is this going to be a contractual position as well? Or will this actually be a state position?
Heidi Hartz for the record. So the Department of Education, through these two work programs, has requested one state position, the Educational Programs Supervisor, which would provide oversight to the implementation and the monitoring of the ARP ESSER funds. There are a great deal of reporting requirements and a great deal of collaboration and coordination that needs to be done, not only within the Department of Education, but across our stakeholder groups and with our contractors, our subrecipients, and our vendors. We've also requested additional funding to hire up to 12 temporary contract positions. Those temporary contract positions would be located within the Student Investment Division and would help us to manage the subgrants and contracts that we anticipate will be in place to expend the ARP ESSER funding over the course of that grant period. All of the positions, whether they are the state position or the contracted temporary positions, would end when the federal funding ends. At this point in time, it's anticipated that those activities would end in December of 2024, based on the information we currently have from the federal government on when the funding period will expire. I would note that the Department of Education is experiencing a great deal of difficulty hiring temporary contract employees. What we are finding is that many of the staff that we have been able to hire, the temporary contractors, are leaving those positions to move into state positions. So we may at some point return to the Interim Finance Committee if this path continues to be as unproductive as it has been so far, to see if we can convert these to state positions as well. Again, we want to make sure that we have the resources that we need to best meet the needs associated with this grant in its administration, but also making sure that our school districts, our charter schools, and our other partners are not impacted because we don't have the capacity to support them in the way that they need.
Thank you, Assemblywoman Miller, and thank you, Ms. Hartz. Do we have any other questions from the committee on these two work programs? Assemblyman Levitt?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I stepped out for a few minutes, so this question might have been asked, and sorry if it's more of a rookie question, but so we talked about the auditing process, and it seems like there's some redundancy there as far as the spending of the money. From what I heard from my colleagues, we're having an auditor audit the auditor, and so it seems like, what is the need for that redundancy? And maybe it's put in place and I don't realize it. It's put in place for a reason, but it seems like if LCB is going to audit these funds anyway, why do we need an outside auditor and spend, $5 to $10 million to do that when we have an auditing process in place that's outside of the Department of Education?
Mr. Chairman, if I could clarify to my colleague in the front row, that was more my conversation about, we have an audit division. Eventually, this will all come to us looking at all these different work programs. So if I confused folks, that was my fault. I don't believe there would be a redundancy. I was just talking about how when they get done with it all, eventually down the road, if you're still here, further on, you'll be looking at all of this. But they need a separate audit and compliance component, and that's what this work program is. So if I confused you, that was my fault. I apologize, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair, for the clarification. I just wanted to get my arms around it, my head around it, I guess.
Thank you, Assemblyman Levitt. I view it more as a compliance issue than an audit issue, and I think it's a great idea and very necessary measure if we have this kind of money coming into the department, so that we can make sure that it's used to the highest and most effective level. Any other questions from the committee? Oh, Senator Dennis.
Thank you. Ms. Hartz, I just want to go back because we had some discussion about 1 year versus 2 year contract. In your response, you mentioned, I think I kind of heard that by having a 2 year, it's more attractive to an accounting firm to bid on a 2 year contract, that we might have a harder time them bidding on a 1. But the other question that I had that goes along with that, would we get a better price if we do a 2 year contract?
Heidi Hartz, for the record. It's hard to predict how a solicitation process will go or how contract negotiations will go. Certainly, the Department of Education has experienced some success in negotiating better pricing with vendors when we have had a multi-year agreement in place.
Okay, thank you.
Assemblywoman Monroe Moreno.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I have a question because of the answer that you just gave. When you go into the negotiations with the contractor, the vendor, whoever that is, you do not let them know up front how much money you have to spend on that contract, correct?
Heidi Hartz, for the record. The process that's used for the solicitation, particularly with a contract of this large dollar value, would be facilitated through the state purchasing division. I do believe that I don't know for certainty whether the purchasing division would indicate that we should disclose the amount of funding available or ask for the cost. The advantage of disclosing the initial amount of funding available is that a vendor could tailor their proposed scope of work to address the needs of the state as well as the available funding. If no maximum amount is identified, then we create an opportunity by which a vendor may put forward a proposal that far exceeds the resources that we have available for this project. We would not want to put our vendors into a position where they're doing perhaps extra work for a project that we cannot fund.
Mr. Chair, follow-up?
Go ahead.
It's been my experiencing with negotiations, and I negotiated for my union. If we let them know our hand up front, then they might negotiate to make sure that they took every dollar that was available instead of coming back with a more honest negotiation. So if you were to go into the negotiation with the $5 million now, saying that you wanted to have a multi-year, you wouldn't be paying for the full multi-year up front. You could pay for the first year, knowing the vendor would know that the money would be available to come back, for you to come back and with the payment for the second year. So you could still negotiate a multi-year contract, even if you didn't have the full amount of cash money up front, correct?
Heidi Hartz, for the record. Again, the solicitation and negotiation process will be facilitated by the purchasing division. While I appreciate that if vendors don't know the maximum dollar value of the contract available, you could potentially get a better price. However, by virtue of this public meeting where we've indicated that we believe that this work may cost up to $10 million, and the Interim Finance Committee is suggesting that they would like to start with $5 million or less, that does give possible vendors opportunity to know what the targeted available funds might be. Again, the Department of Education has been working very aggressively, particularly during the COVID-19 pandemic, with all of our vendors to try to maximize the services that we can acquire for the funds that we have available, even to find cost savings as we work with the vendors, recognizing that we do want to maximize every dollar that we have received to support the education of our students.
Thank you so much for that. So because we are in a public meeting, I appreciate you saying that. Any vendor that we do go after would be able to look at this record and know that even though the $5 million would be available now, the multi-year contract would be paid for. So I thank you so much for getting that on the record.
Thank you, Assemblywoman Monroe Moreno. And I have another question, or a clarifying question, I think, from Assemblywoman Benitez Thompson.
Thanks, and I appreciate it. This goes back to my line of questions before. So I was just, because I'm always, want to make sure that at the end of the process, my understanding of how I thought something would play out is how it's going to play out. And so I just want to make sure these questions aren't of whether or not we support the idea of an audit or not. My question is just more like exactly what that work product will look like at the end. And so I just want to make sure my understanding is clear. And so because it's and I think I thought of a better way to ask the question ultimately. So the audit, what I was trying to get at is whose door they're walking through and how frequently. So I think my understanding is they're not doing an audit of NDE like once a year, or we'll say once a year. I guess the frequency is your guys are going to be determined. But it would be you're sending the auditor to the subgroup, the auditor will walk through the subgrantee's office at like once a year. So am I understanding that right? You're not asking for an audit of yourself. You're going to send the auditor into the subgrantee's office and audit them, I would imagine, at a minimum once a year, although I guess now would be the time on the record if you're saying it's going to be more or twice a year, but that's my correct understanding of it.
Heidi Hartz for the record. Yes, the intent of this audit is to audit our subrecipients, not the Department of Education. We do appreciate that the audit firms may choose to look at our internal controls and our current documentation that goes to subrecipients, and that may provide an opportunity for the audit firm to provide recommendations for how we can strengthen those documents to better articulate the requirements for our subrecipients. But the subrecipients are who will be audited. And at this point, we would look for audit firms to propose the frequency for which those audits should be done. And that may vary based on the number of projects each subrecipient is funded for. It may also vary based on the amount of funding that a subrecipient is receiving.
Thank you. So I think, I don't think we have any further comments or questions on these, on item 14 and 16. And I would be interested in taking a motion to approve these work programs, but I think with a caveat. And Vice Chair Carlton, please go ahead.
And thank you, Mr. Chairman. And, just a closing statement. We really do appreciate the audit function. If you don't monitor and measure it, you can't get a true feeling for where these dollars are going. And ultimately, the department will be held accountable, accountable, the administration. We totally appreciate the audit function. We just want to make sure that as we disperse these dollars, not with the Department of Education, but with other departments, we've had problems where we've given it all to them and found out at the end that none of it worked, and we ended up in a lawsuit and we had to fund it all over again. So we just want to make sure that whoever does get the RFP, whoever does it, we can watch them move forward. This is a whole new world for us, so we just want to be able to build in some of that transparency and ongoing communication between the department and IFC and on how these dollars are spent in the future. So I totally appreciate this audit function. And with that being said, Mr. Chairman, I would, my motion would include approval of the items with the one change as far as the $10 million go, approving the $5 million as the beginning of it, not knowing whether that'll pay for a full year, a year and a half, or less than a year, $5 million to start the process. And then when a contract is done, they can come back, we can have further conversations and see where we are from there, knowing full well that these dollars will be available. We just want to make sure that we have that ongoing conversation about the RFP process and who ends up performing these functions. So that would be my motion, is to disperse the first $5 million. And if this thing goes really well, who knows, they could be back in 2 IFCs and ask for the second half, and we may all sing Kumbaya and move forward. So that would be my motion.
Thank you, Vice Chair. And I just want to clarify that it's still a multi-year contract that we would be entering into, or trying to enter into.
Yes, full intention. And I believe that even after the 2 years, we're going to have you all will have further conversations about extending it even longer to make sure that these dollars are well spent. So, but this is just the first stab at the first 2 years, because we do things in an interim basis. So this would be for the first 2 years, yes.
All right. I have a motion. Do we have any discussion on that motion? I have a motion from Vice Chair Carlton, a second from Senator Dennis. Any discussion on the motion? Senator Dennis?
I think you just clarified this, but the way I understood this is they're going to negotiate for a 2-year contract, but we're going to only front the first $5 million. And then, because we've done this before when we do like a 5-year contract or whatever, right? So, we're giving them authority to negotiate for the 2-year and going to put the $5 million up. Okay. All right.
Correct.
All right. Thank you. Any other discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all in favor, aye. And if we could go back to the screen, broadcast services, where we could see our members to make sure that they see how they're voting. All right, please raise your hand if you are in agreement. All right, great, everyone's in agreement. So all opposed, nay. And the motion passes unanimously with the members present. Thank you. And that brings us to our next item under G. And this is item 17, while we have the Department of Education. There's not necessarily any concerns with this item. I just wanted to, I have a question while we have you here. And my question on that item 17, work program, it talks about the funding that was distributed to school districts and charter schools for homeless children and youth grant, the McKinney-Vento Education Homeless Children and Youth Grant. And the distribution of that 1.3 million, when I'm looking at, for instance, Washoe and Clark make up less than half of that funding. And, you know, Washoe and Clark joined make up 80% of all the kids in the state. And a lot of the urban areas and the hardest hit areas of the state are in Washoe and Clark. And so just briefly, how is that distribution? It says it's competitively awarded, but it seems it doesn't seem to align with the need. How is what is the criteria by which that was awarded to schools and school districts?
Heidi Hartz for the record. So the funds represented in this work program come from the ARP Homeless One funds, and the federal government has indicated that states should be allocating these funds using a similar methodology that was used with the McKinney-Vento funds. This is very similar to some of the other funding that we had received where funds were allocated using the methodology for Title I funds as a comparison. So it just happens that with the homeless funding, they're looking at another grant that's similar in nature and suggesting that that's how the allocation should be done. Our director of the Office of Student and School Support is available if you want more detailed information on the McKinney-Vento application process.
Thank you. And does this have anything to do with the fact that some direct allocations were given to school districts like Clark County School District and Washoe County School District and maybe not necessarily some of the smaller districts? It just screams at me that, like, you know, Carson City has a similar homeless problem as Washoe County, that something's off there. And so I just like a little bit more clarification.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. For the record, this is State Superintendent Joan Ebert, and we have Dr. Keo on the line who will answer.
Sangdao Yang Keo for the record. Heidi Hartz, Deputy Heidi Hartz is correct. So the methodology is based off of a similar grant, and that is how, that's why the percentages are allocated in that method and fashion to equivocate with that other federal grant for homeless youth.
Thank you. I'm sure that is factually correct, but that does not help me understand anything. So, why, let me just ask it really bluntly. Why does Carson City, a population of what, 50,000 people?
60,000.
60,000 people get $170,000 and Clark, population of 2 point something million, and get roughly twice that, 342,000. Why?
Sangdao Yang Kyo for the record. It is awarded proportionally. And so at this point, there is a methodology from the federal government to account for the number and percentage of homeless youth. But there are also other indicators across the state that go into a formula that helps us to determine what the funding will be for each of the districts across the state for the homeless allocations. It is awarded competitively. I apologize, and so let me just make that. It is based on the quality of the application and how the plans are in alignment with the district supports for homeless youth within that district. And so we do review the district applications. Districts apply for these grants competitively, and then it is in alignment with their needs. And so as districts are submitting competitive grants to the Nevada Department of Education, we are reviewing for the alignment with their needs for homeless youth, as well as their capacity to respond to serving the needs of homeless youth. And so that is one primary reason why you might see, or one might see, the disproportionality that you're pointing out. But again, that is based on guidance from the federal government.
Thank you. That answers my question exactly. So it's based on quality of the application and quality of the plan as well, not just the need. So I appreciate that. That question, that answers my question thoroughly. Senator Dondero Loop, do you still have a question?
So just to follow up to that, because I'm hearing the word quality in there, which concerns me, but because Carson City has about, 7,500 students, and Clark County has 320,000, and Washoe has 63,000. So proportionately, you can assume that we have in Clark County about 7,000 or more homeless students, which would be the amount of students total in Carson City. And that would also be about the same with Churchill. I know that Elko's a little bit more. So how do we get the quality of those applications? How do we help those districts with the quality of those applications? Or is that not your responsibility, which I would understand?
Sangdao Yang Kyo for the record. The Nevada Department of Education is responsible for providing supports to our local education agencies, and it is our responsibility to help each of the districts to submit competitive grant applications and to build their capacity for serving and meeting the needs of our homeless youth, which, as we all know, are one of our most underserved, historically underserved student groups, not just in the state, but across the nation. So it is something that within the Nevada Department of Education, we have prioritized. Some of the things that we do is we meet regularly with district leaders to discuss the supports that they provide to homeless youth. We provide technical assistance in collaboration with national partners, with partners across the state. We are building and expanding the supports and services that we provide to district leaders. And so those are some of the mechanisms, the more traditional mechanisms that we have leveraged within the Nevada Department of Education to build and strengthen the capacity of our district leaders so that they are submitting applications that accurately represent their needs and align with their needs, but that also address and meet the needs of our homeless youth. And then I will just also add that one of the reasons why the Nevada Department of Education is so excited about these funds, in particular from the feds, is because there is a need for additional funds to to strengthen the capacity of our district leaders across the state. And so part of the funding, a lot of the funding is going to go straight to that. It's going to go to the district so that they can implement additional services. But in terms of the statewide activities funds for this particular program, we are leveraging the funding to build capacity at the local.
Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Assemblywoman Miller.
Thank you, Chair Brooks. As it seems, the question is concerning kind of the proportionality of the disbursement of these funds. I noticed that Pinecrest Academy is getting the same amount as Pershing County Schools. And so I'm wondering, when it came to the charter schools, kind of the same questions. Is Pinecrest the only charter school that applied? And why wouldn't it maybe the funds be going to the Charter School Authority for them to disperse? And also, what is the homeless population of Pinecrest students compared to the other charter schools and also Pershing County Schools, which is receiving the same exact amount?
Sangdao Yang Kyo for the record. I will have to touch base with my team to confirm the latest data regarding the homeless youth population within charter schools, as well as in comparison to districts. We do have some of the data, but I do want to put out there one of the reasons why, again, that we are very excited about receiving these federal relief funds is to help ensure that we are collecting accurate numbers for homeless youth. Right now, and I want to be clear about this, the data systems, there is a need for us to strengthen the capacity for that. In addition, SPSA, that's the State Public Charter School Authority, did not have the authority to receive the funds. So we do need to get back to you on the student counts. In particular, I think it's important to note Homeless 2 funds, the methodology does not need to align to the competitive funding. So again, when we receive competitive grant applications from the districts as well as from charter schools, we review them, judge them off of a rubric, and then assess whether or not those districts have the capacity to meet the needs of homeless youth. So it is something that we can work and strengthen to build supports across the state so that districts are submitting competitive grant applications and at the same time meeting their needs. What I'm hearing at this exact moment is a need to provide supports to those districts in particular that have large numbers of homeless youth. And so that is something that we can also redirect attention to moving forward.
Follow-up, Chair?
Sure, go ahead.
And maybe this is more of a statement, but I just feel that we're not capturing all of the homeless youth that we have in our state. This is a very condensed list, and even looking at Esmeralda, which I believe is one of our most struggling counties, I just don't feel that we're capturing, and kind of it's not clear between which is competitive and the process for these grants, and if there's already a recognized need to help the districts apply for them, submit a more quality application. I really feel that should have been taken into consideration, because it does not look like we're capturing, and especially among the charter schools, all of the students that would be in need and all of the programming that's necessary.
All right, thank you. Do we have any other questions or comments on item 17? All right, seeing none, I would take a motion to approve item 17. I have a first from Senator Dennis, a second from Vice Chair Carlton. Any discussion on that motion? All right, and seeing none, all in favor, aye. Aye. And if we could go to our screen. All right, everybody's aye on the Zoom. Thank you. On any opposed, nay? And the motion passes unanimously with the members present. And I just also want to clarify that, just for the purposes of clarification, that we did include item 14 with item 16 when we took that motion. We took those together, and Vice Chair Carlton made that motion for both of those. I think it might have been a little vague, but I just want to make that clarification. And then if we can go to, next up would be item 18. While we did not pull that for discussion, we did make a modification. Staff noted a modification to that item. So I think it's appropriate to actually, it wasn't in the consent agenda as modified. So I would take a motion to approve item 18 as amended by staff. And to approve that item. All right, cool. We got a motion from Vice Chair Dennis, a second from, Vice Chair Carlton, a second from Senator Dennis. Any discussion on that motion? Seeing none, all in favor, aye. Aye. And on Zoom? Broadcast services, we cannot see our members. There we go. They're all ayes as well. Thank you. All opposed, nay. And motion passes unanimously with all the members present. And we can go to our next item under G, and that would be item 24, if I'm correct. And that is from Department of Business and Industry, Housing, Account for Low-Income Housing, Work Program C54700. All right, welcome.
Good morning, Chair Brooks. Would you like me to provide an overview?
Please do.
Thank you. Again, good morning, Chair Brooks, Vice Chair Carlton, members of the committee. For the record, I'm Steve Acroft, Administrator of the Nevada Housing Division. With me today is Michael Holliday, Chief Financial Officer of the division. And in Las Vegas, we have Varice Campbell, the CEO of the Nevada Affordable Housing Assistance Corporation, or NAHAC. Thank you for your time and consideration of the acceptance of homeowner assistance funds provided in the American Rescue Plan. The Homeowner Assistance Fund, or I'm going to call it HAF, was established to mitigate financial hardships associated with the coronavirus pandemic by providing funds for the purpose of preventing homeowner mortgages, mortgage delinquencies, foreclosures, defaults, loss of utilities and home energy services, and displacements of homeowners experiencing financial hardship after January 21st, 2020, through qualified expenses related to mortgages and housing. The state of Nevada will be receiving a total of $121 million in HAF. Today's approval is for the initial 10% of that funding. This first tranche, and I apologize for the use of the word tranche, but it's going to come up frequently. Were specifically designed to accomplish three things. One, to begin to procure the infrastructure needed to administer the program. Two, begin to hire staff to administer the program. Three, begin to create, reinstate, or continue existing programs to assist homeowners. The balance of the 90% of the funds will be provided once a plan is submitted to the U.S. Treasury, and that plan is due to be submitted with a deadline date of June 30th or an extension requested by that date. I will like the committee to know that recent communications with Treasury indicate they will be providing an extension of that June 30th deadline, as they have not established the templates and communications that we need to submit those plans. Unlike the emergency rental assistance, which you'll hear next, and which was divided between local jurisdictions and the state. HAF funding is provided solely to the state. If approved today, the Housing Division will engage the Nevada Affordable Housing Corporation, Assistance Corporation, to be the entity to disperse those funds. As NAHAC, and in particular, the NAHAC leadership team led by Ms. Campbell has had great experience with U.S. Treasury homeowner assistance programs. They have the ability to scale up and initiate the program, including reinstating some programs which existed previously. With that overview, we stand ready to answer any questions the committee may have.
Thank you very much, Mr. Acroft. We do have a number of questions, but your last statement, last couple of statements. So they've extended the June 30th deadline. Do you have a date for that? Did I miss that?
Steve Acroft, for the record, they have not extended the June 30th deadline as we speak. They have indicated that they will be extending that deadline.
And we don't know what the date will be yet, so you can keep us informed on that moving forward. And so this is homeowner assistance, but this first 10% basically is just to set up the program and get everything all lined up so that the money can hit the ground and help the individual homeowners. And you're saying that the major is it an agent at the who's going to actually be managing the money?
Steve Acroft, for the record. So this initial 10% will be provided to the division, and the division will enter an agreement with NAHAC, the Nevada Affordable Housing Assistance Corporation, and as indicated, we have Maurice Campbell, the CEO of NAHAC, present in front of us.
All right, and so that's basically to just set up the structure to begin with. And committee members and the public, in the interest of full disclosure, we are a citizens legislature. This is something that I do every day in my real line of work, so my questions are probably going to be a little out of the norm, but my goal in the last 20 some years has always been to disclose where I'm coming from and go from there. Through this pandemic, we had a lot of homeowners ask us for help, and unfortunately the assistance that was available was just for renters, because they knew that through the foreclosure process and forbearances, we could work with homeowners to try to keep them stable. We were more afraid of evictions on the rental side. So seeing a program come forward for homeowners is very gratifying, because I can tell you two of the largest groups in Southern Nevada that you're probably going to see come forward looking for this assistance. So through NAHAC, is this going to be sub-granted out to other entities for them to be able to reach out to those groups that we know need this assistance, or is everything going to be funneled through NAHAC? Whoever wants to jump in.
Yeah, Steve Acroft, for the record. The initial funding that we will receive will go to NAHAC, and then I will let Ms. Campbell commentary on exactly how she plans to initiate that funding.
Thank you very much, Mr. Acroft. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair, I believe. I'm Verice Campbell. To the members of the committee, thank you very much for the opportunity to be here. Again, Verice Campbell, VericeCampbell, for the record. And I am the CEO for the Nevada Affordable Housing Assistance Corporation. The Nevada Affordable Housing Assistance Corporation, also known as NAHAC, we are the administrators of the Hardest Hit Fund at this time, and we are winding down that particular program. It was a $200 million program. The first 5 years of the program starting up was a little rocky. I was brought in approximately 5 years ago to revamp the programs and get the money out and to make sure that we're addressing our homeowners in need. And I'm very proud to say we were able to administer all of the dollars. As a matter of fact, we were able to distribute even more dollars than what Treasury had actually given us, because we had received lien recoveries and we were able to recycle those dollars. So we are very proud of that record, to be able to turn it around, and then to also say we actually funded over 9,000 files. Some of those households received assistance twice, so that brought it down to about 8,000 households that we helped. So this is another opportunity for us to assist our homeowners. We know the pandemic hit Nevada very, very hard. As we were winding down the hardest hit fund, we actually started keeping a list of those homeowners who were calling, asking for assistance for a new program. So the approximately $12.1 million would be utilized to definitely set up the infrastructure. There's a new technology, new system that needs to be acquired. We have to, of course, beef up the staff again. And because we do have experience in administering these programs, we actually have a framework for a couple of programs we can roll out. We're looking at rolling out initially the unemployment mortgage assistance program that we were very successful in providing, but we're going to add another key component to that. We're going to add reinstatement to the unemployment program. That will allow us to bring homeowners current and pay their mortgage to allow them to truly get on their feet. Because that was one thing we did see during the pandemic. Yeah, we could pay their mortgage, but they were still behind. And then the other program that makes sense would be to start with a mortgage reinstatement assistance program for those homeowners who are now back to work and they just need to be brought current. So those are the two programs, the two main programs we're looking at starting out. If you know anything about how I like to do things, I like to do it very aggressively. So the $12 million will not just be for infrastructure. We're actually looking to roll out the programs within that time frame as well.
And the chair's returned, but I'm going to go ahead and do a quick follow-up, and then I have another committee member. So it would be my understanding then that NAHEC would be the sole administrator, that these dollars would not be sub-granted out as in other programs in order to reach out into the community and to their client base. It would strictly be granted through NAHEC alone. Is that correct?
That is, I kind of went the long way around. We actually partner with the housing counseling agencies. The Treasury guidelines calls for up to 5% of the total amount of the funds to go to assistance with housing counseling agencies as well as legal aid. We are budgeting to actually, again, partner with our housing counseling agencies. They were very instrumental in helping us to administer the hardest hit fund dollars, so we'd like to do that again as well. And then also our servicers. The servicers, we have a list of approximately 100 servicers that we worked with in the past. We actually do coordinated mailers that will go out to their base. That's actually the #1 way that we reach our homeowners. And then also we're going to do targeted media campaigns and blitzes that will target those hardest hit neighborhoods. We're able to identify those hardest hit neighborhoods right down to the zip code level. So we'll be targeting into those areas. And then there's also some nuances that are built into the Treasury guidelines that require us to actually target the socially disadvantaged homeowners. So we are able to identify data that will show us right down to the zip code level where we should be targeting those dollars as well. I hope I answered your question.
I believe so. I think my biggest concern is I know 2 large groups that are looking for assistance because my phone rings off the hook every single day. Yesterday, I took 6 calls alone in an afternoon, people looking for help. So my biggest concern is, honestly, I'm not that familiar with the Hardest Hit Fund, and I wouldn't have known to send a constituent to the Hardest Hit Fund. So I just want to make sure that the folks that are out there that need this assistance don't get overlooked because it's going to go through servicers rather than through constituents. So I'm hoping that you'll partner with 211 so that when folks call there, because we refer everyone to 211, to make sure that if they need this, that they know who to call. If you've already established a list of people that you're going to help and some of our constituents aren't on that list right now, how will they get that assistance? So we just want to make sure that the money hits as broadly and widely for all these folks, because we know there's two particular groups out there right now that aren't going to go back to work for a very long time. They made a very good living, and, you know, they're homeowners, and a number of them are on the verge of losing their homes right now because it's been a year since they've worked. And I just want to make sure that they don't get lost because they didn't come and ask for help before. So as long as we can make that's the goal, is to make sure that this information is available. So I'm hoping you will partner with 211. And I know Ms. Howdege had a question, and then I'll be happy to turn it back over to the chair.
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair. Thank you, Ms. Campbell. It's so nice to see you again. And I am very familiar with the Hardest Hit program, Hardest Hit Funds program, and also with NAHAC. I worked for Financial Guidance Center when we were awarded the program to help with the backlog of Hardest Hit funds. So I'm happy to see that this will help get the program up and running quickly because you guys already have the infrastructure built. As I was reading through the information, I know that first tranche of money that was coming in, it was recommended by Treasury that only 50% be used for setting up the program and the administrative costs. So can you tell me what percentage, or I don't know if this is a better question for B&I, but how much is actually going to go towards assistance in this pilot phase, and how much is going to be spent on the administrative side in this first tranche of money?
Thank you, Varice Campbell, again for the record, and to the Vice Chair. I would encourage anyone that you know of that will need assistance, have them call my office now. We are actually compiling a list. We definitely want to help as many people as possible, and we don't want them to get lost. So they can call our office right now. We're listed on the web, nahac.org, and they can go there, they can contact us, they can fill in the information, and we'll make sure they get put on the list. And now to your question, we are looking at the majority of those funds for infrastructure, but we will be rolling out the program. So when you talk about the percentage, I would say probably about 20-25% will start to roll out the programs, but the majority of funds we will need definitely to set up the infrastructure because we wound down the staff, so we have a skeleton crew at this point. But we are looking to ramp up very quickly. And also the one thing the pandemic has taught us is that we can be very, very effective with remote work. Our call center, we were very surprised at how many calls we were able to take. And I mean, there were some times in a month we'd take like 3,000 calls. So we're definitely looking to use some of those processes and the policies we put in place during the pandemic to maximize getting the program up and running quickly.
And if I could, Madam Vice Chair and Chair. Okay, a couple more follow-ups. Okay, thank you, Ms. Campbell. And then I just have a couple more questions because I want to make sure I get a grasp of how many people are going to be reaching out. Now, in the information I read, Treasury awarded money to the states based on how many people were unemployed and how many mortgages were in a 30-day plus late status and a foreclosure status. Do you guys have those numbers? Can you let us know approximately how many households are in that 30-plus day late and foreclosure status that we're expecting to apply?
We actually do have the data, but I don't have it with me, so I can definitely provide that information at a later date. But I can tell you the number of homeowners we are expecting overall to assist with the total round of funding, the approximately $121 million. We're looking at assisting right now about 6,800 households. And actually, you know, that number can fluctuate because there will be a number of homeowners that will come through the program multiple times. We do count households only one time, even if they come through multiple times. If I look at the Hardest Hit Fund, we had approximately 1,000 homeowners who actually came through the program multiple times. And, you know, so it fluctuates. And we are looking, because of the pandemic, we know that homeowners will be more behind for more months than they were actually during the time of the Hardest Hit Fund. So we are looking at funding more homeowners at potentially a higher amount. We are looking to put a cap on each of the programs. For the unemployment program, we're looking at a maximum lifetime of $54,000. For the reinstatement program, we're looking at $35,000. Now, we also will build in a total complete program cap of approximately $100,000. The reason we do that is it's been our experience that these programs change as the need changes. So there may be a need right now for unemployment and reinstatement, but we may have to come back before this committee and tell you we'd like to do a principal reduction program, which was one of the programs that we did in the Hardest Hit Fund. Or if things are really great, the economy turns around and we don't have as many people out of work in 3 years from now, we might want to come back and do a down payment assistance program. So we want it to be flexible.
Okay, thank you. And then, so 6,800 households, and if you would get that number to us, I guess, to the entire committee about how many mortgages are the 30-day plus and in foreclosure status. So then that way we know if there's still more homeowners who need assistance that we're going to be able to assist through this program. And then if I could, one more follow-up. Okay.
Briefly.
Okay, thank you. I apologize. This is an area I'm very passionate about. My last question, and then I'll take the rest of them offline. So you guys have the infrastructure set up, the portal set up on the NAHAC.org website. If this is approved today, you'll have the money. How soon can people start applying for this first round of assistance? That's going to be about 25% of the 100 or the 12 million.
Well, actually, we do not have, again, Varice Campbell for the record, we do not have a portal set up. We have our website, but we will need to acquire a new system of record. And of course, we'd have to do an RFP. So we're looking at approximately, I'd say, even with me being very aggressive, possibly 90 days.
Wow. Okay. Okay, and then just the last statement is that I know you had mentioned you guys are going to cap the certain programs, but our vice chair brought up a great point about, making sure the information is disseminated, and I hope that we would prioritize some of these programs because I know that this money could be used for like utility assistance and HOA property taxes, but there are other organizations who offer that same kind of service that don't offer the mortgage assistance. So I would encourage you guys to prioritize the mortgage assistance, the mortgage payments, the clearing up the forbearances, clearing up the delinquencies, and then partnering with the other organizations who can help supplement the other lates, whether it's their utilities or their internet. And thank you for your indulgence.
Thank you. And Senator Severs-Gansert.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Following up on some of Assemblywoman Howdige's questions. So mine is sort of related to the overhead, and you said there's probably about 25% that of the first 12 million that will be able to be funded to individuals who are having difficulty. There's a plan that's due to get the other 90% of the dollars, and it looks like it's due by June 30th of this year, like at the end of this month, I guess. And so is that, I'm not sure if you're preparing that plan or if the agency's preparing that plan, but I wanted to know if we're ready to prepare that plan so we can get the rest of it. And then the question is, how much do you expect, either in dollars or percentage-wise, to be the administrative cost to administer the full 120.9 if we're able to receive those funds?
Thank you, Varice Campbell, again for the record. We actually do have a draft budget, and we're looking at approximately 82% of that draft budget to be to go out to homeowners to be utilized on the programs. We're looking at approximately 15% for the administrative costs over the lifetime of the program, and then we're also looking at approximately 3% for our counselors to utilize to help us get the word out. And the housing counseling agencies, they don't also just help us get the word out, but they actually become an extension of us and assist with taking applications. So we're able to maximize how many applications we can take by utilizing those agencies as well.
Thank you. And off the top of my head, 18% sounds high. So I don't know if there's a plan that gets submitted to the agency for their approval, or if this comes back through IFC, or how, because I think we need to get the dollars out as soon as possible, but as many dollars as possible. So we have to, focus on how to keep our administrative costs down. And I think it is good to have some partnerships to get the word out.
Yes, I'm sorry if I said 18%. The administrative cost is actually 15%.
Well, I think it was 15 plus the 3, right? And then,
the 3% under the Treasury guidelines, they're actually allowing up to 3% for the counseling agencies over the entire amount of the funds. And they're allowing 5%. We're actually budgeting for 3%. We're budgeting for 15% administrative expenses, but as the division can attest to, I'm budgeting for 15%, but I'm targeting for 12.5%, 13% administrative costs.
Thank you. And ultimately, does the division approve the plan and the plan goes forward? Because I think you're on a really tight timeline to be able to put together this plan and provide it to the federal government so we can even get the dollars. So maybe you can speak to that. Maybe the division can speak to that.
Sure.
Actually, I'm sorry, Varice Campbell again for the record. Oh, Steve, go ahead.
Okay. So actually, the ultimate plan is approved by Treasury. And so to go back to answer some of your questions, they will determine when the dollars come through and when they hit. Now, this meeting and this approval that we have today is strictly for this 10%. So the additional 90%, that will have to come before IFC or whatever that dollar amount that Treasury allows based on their approval.
Thank you. Maybe I misread that because I thought there was a plan that was due by June 30th to be able to get the other 90%, or is that accurate or just for the 10%?
Steve Acroft for the record. No, the 10% went out to do exactly what we're talking about here, get the infrastructure set up and get some money into people's pockets. That doesn't require Treasury approval. We still need to work within their guidelines, but that doesn't require Treasury approval. We do need to submit a plan or an extension for the submission of that plan as it stands right now by June 30th. As indicated previously, Treasury has indicated to us that that plan or that June 30th date is probably going to shift because they have not established all the portals and things that we need to do to even submit those plans as of today's date.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. And I have a question from Senator Ratty as well.
Thank you, Chair Brooks. I appreciate the opportunity. Just a very detailed clarification. So I understand from the notes that you have to be at 150% of area median income or less to qualify. And I'm wondering if this is like the rental program where that is truly your current status within this year. So if you've lost employment or anything along those lines and your area median income or your median income has been reduced, then you can qualify, or is it based on the prior year's tax return?
Okay, it's Varice Campbell for the record. I know Steve and I understand there's a delay too. So Steve, I'm not sure if you want to take that.
Well, I was going to say it's our understanding that you just have to show that you had that impact at whatever time between now, even moving forward, and January 21st of 2020. So as long as any time in that span, you can demonstrate that eligibility, whether it's through tax returns, paycheck stubs, whatever it might be, you would be eligible, provided you're below those eligibility benchmarks.
Okay. And do we know if you are successful in getting your job back? So like, here's my concern. So pandemic started January 2020, or was primarily in 2020. Folks are way behind on they've lost their employment. Folks are way behind on their mortgage. And then they need to apply for this program. They're able to demonstrate that because their income has been impacted because they've lost their job. Now they get their job back. Now they're above the 150% area of income, but they're still painfully delinquent on their mortgage and aren't going to be able to dig out on their own. And so when that 150% income, area median income is measured, will be important in terms of how people qualify. And I suspect we probably don't get to interpret that, and it'll be a Treasury guidance question. And I know we tripped up over that on some of the rental assistance programs, at least in the early days. So once your able to get farther along in the process, if you would just share that information, I think that'd be helpful.
Steve Acroft for the record. Yeah, we will be able to do that. And, you know, when it does come back for the approval of the 90% before the IFC, I think we'll have a lot of these questions answered and have a specific plan and address a lot of these concerns that you're bringing up.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Ratty. And we have another question from Assemblywoman Benitez Thompson, please.
Thank you, Chair Brooks, for allowing me to ask the question. So as always, going to ask a little bit about what this application process will look like, a little bit of what the families who walk through the door when they start this process, what they might be asked. And so I see here the word attest. So it looks like there's going to be an attestation process. I guess I'll start with my first question of, it looks like from the notes I have that might be a narrative process submitted by the family versus like a check mark process, like a test if you have been, you know, if you've had job loss, reduction of income, increased cost, or something like that. So could you, am I right in assuming that it sounds like it's going to be a narrative attestation?
Farice Campbell for the record. The application process that we utilized with the Hardest Hit Fund, we were very successful in having the homeowners call in. They speak to a live person, and our agent actually completes the application. It will be a series of questions. After they answer those questions, an application package goes out to them. At that time, they'll read over their application packet, and then the attestation, we do have that, but there are also other questions that they're asked as well. And then there is an underwriting process. So if there's additional information that we need, because if you know anything about Treasury, there's an awful lot of compliance. And I'm happy to say we've done very well on our compliance reviews. So we're going to continue to do what we've been doing. But there is one thing that Treasury made sure that they wanted all of the states to know. They do not want this process to be so arduous that it would take so much time to get this money to these homeowners' accounts. So that is one thing we are taking into account as well.
I appreciate that, because how you go through the process and what you ask for, you know, will determine how easily or not families can navigate things. And of course, we have families of all different kinds of functioning levels and levels of sophistication, although because these are mortgages, we might expect that they would be, you know, have a better idea of some of the financial questions they're going to be asked. So they'll call in, they'll get a live person on the line. That person will, I guess, kind of that first step, I guess it sounds like serves as a screening process. So they'll start by asking about that income question to see if they meet the 150% of area media income. And I guess your callers will be trained, your screeners will be trained to understand any nuances that Senator Ratty just described, like presently I am above 150, but for the past 9 months I had not been. So there will be that in that process. And then I guess, so when they call in, they ought to be prepared to have lots of financial information to provide in that first step process.
Farice Campbell again for the record. We actually tell them what they need to have ready for us. There's a pre-screening they can do as well, but our agents are trained to take that application right there on the spot. It usually takes on average 15 to 20 minutes, and that the 20 minutes is if a homeowner says, oh, I don't have my pay stub right here or my mortgage statement, hold on, let me go get it. And then if they don't have a particular piece of documentation, we just skip that area, we answer the rest of the questions, and then they get a system-generated letter that's emailed to them saying, okay, we need ABC.
Okay, and I appreciate that. And much like much like Assemblywoman Carlton, you know, I ask these questions as a, you know, coming from my experience and background, just being a licensed social worker, so being the one who's guiding families towards resources and preparing them for like how resilient they have to be to make it through an application process and the type of questions they're going to be asked. So that's why I always ask questions about what does that qualification process look like and what's going to be asked. And for our folks who need help, how do we prepare them to be ready to complete an application, because just like we saw with the the rental assistance program, we had a high level of attrition when we started it out, and that process really had to be rethought in terms of just making sure that qualified people indeed were getting through and not just self-selecting out because of a complicated process. So I appreciate the thought giving to the flow of that application process.
Thank you, Assemblywoman. We have Assemblyman Hafen has Levitt has a question as well. Hafen's not here today. Levitt has a question as well on this issue. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, I wish you were the first one that got us mixed up. Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I'm just trying to wrap my arms around the numbers when we're talking about what households are going to receive, the administrative costs, the counseling costs. I mean, we're looking at $17 million of administrative costs over the life of the program, over this expenditure of, and then, $3 to $4 million in counseling. So that leaves roughly $100 million per house, or for the actual dispersion of funds to households, which would leave roughly $14,700 in change per household if you average it out over 6,800 households. And so we're looking at $2,500 to administer $14,000. And that just seems a little inefficient to me. And maybe I'm getting the numbers wrong. Maybe there's some formula that I'm not looking at, but I'm just looking at what was said. At 15% of the funding dedicated towards administrative costs, that's what your numbers are looking at. And if you drop it to 12%, it's, roughly still $15 million for administrative costs. So you're looking at, $2,100 for every, $14,000 that's distributed per household if you broke it down in that. So it just seems a little inefficient to me that we're spending $2,500 to disperse $14,000. And maybe my math is wrong, and maybe I'm not understanding it properly, and maybe you can provide some clarification on that.
Sure. Varice Campbell again for the record. I'm not going to say your math is wrong, but I will say the formula is not quite right. If you're looking at distributing it the way you're counting it, every household is not going to get $54,000 or what's the other one, the 35,000. So there's actually a formula that we do utilize based off of the experience of the hardest hit fund, and we can definitely provide that. There's a huge workbook. I mean, my staff, they're still texting me right now, but there's a huge workbook that goes into all of this, and we can definitely share it with you. There are certain Treasury guidelines that we have to follow, and as I told you, the Treasury compliance is very, very arduous. So the numbers that you spouted, using just a few numbers that I rattled off, there's quite more involved in it. And then also, too, with the Treasury guidelines, the requirement for to utilize the housing counseling agencies, there's certain guidelines that we have to follow. And when it comes to administering the Treasury dollars and making sure that we're operating efficiently and having our administrative cap at a certain percentage, Treasury is extremely strict about that. So, the number of households, you may get a household that all they may need may be $4,000. But then you might get that household that they need $100,000. We funded a gentleman who was unemployed up in the north, and he needed that $100,000. He was on a fixed income, and that was under our principal reduction program. So, there's a certain percentage of homeowners that are going to be on the low funding end, and then there's that percentage that's going to be in the middle, and then there's the high end. So we can certainly provide the committee the information that we utilize to come to those numbers, And that, I think that will give you a better perspective.
Can you follow up, please? Could you also, and I know we've asked for this before, but, you know, regardless of how much funding each household earns, it's still, on average, the entity that's performing these distributions is spending $2,500 per household, whether they get $4,000 or $35,000, you know, and that just seems inefficient no matter what the dispersion is. And so if we could see a plan, like how is this money, how is these administrative costs, because that's a big amount of money for, you know, for a program, and I'm not sure how long the duration of the funding of 120,000 is supposed to be dispersed by, but, you know, $17 million in administrative costs to, you know, that's a big hit to what could be allocated to homeowners in need. And so that's why I would love to see how that administrative allocation is provided, as well as the counseling, because, you know, $4 million in counseling seems very high for the duration of this particular amount of funding. So if we could be provided with that, just for my own edification and comfort.
Again, Verice Campbell for the record. We're looking at a duration of approximately 5 years. It will be an aggressive program because this program is in response to a pandemic. So in order to ramp up, and you got to have a system that can handle it, those will be some of those front-end costs. But we will definitely be more than happy to provide you a detailed outline of the draft budget.
Thank you, Ms. Campbell. Appreciate that. And we have a question from Assemblywoman Gorlow.
Thank you, Chair. And, I had a quick question. We've seen with many of the other programs some fraud that has been in place. So I'm not sure if you're quite to that part in your plan, but what safeguards have you discussed or put in place to help prevent some of that fraud from happening?
Verice Campbell for the record. United States Department of Treasury, again, there's quite a bit of compliance. There's also the Special Inspector General for the TARP assistance funds, TARP assistance relief funds. SIGTARP is a particular body that has both an audit faction and an investigatory faction. We are audited and have multiple investigations going on with SIGTARP on a regular basis. Right now, I can tell you there are 2 ongoing, and SIGTARP, they're actually looking at potential files for fraud. They're not investigating our agency, they're investigating homeowners because of the high number of fraud that's been happening with these pandemic dollars. So they're taking a look. Some of the safeguards that we have in place, we make sure that we follow the guidelines that Treasury has established. We've been very successful in stemming potential fraud. There were multiple files that were identified as possible fraud that did not get funded. And we were actually spoken of in a positive manner by SIGTARP recently in their latest report because of some of the measures that we have in place. And so we're looking, you know, there's always more that we can do. We meet regularly on a weekly basis with other states that are rolling out this Hardest Hit Fund program, and we're all putting together our heads to come up with best practices.
Thank you, Assemblywoman Gorlow, for the question. Thank you, Ms. Campbell. I do not think we have any other questions from this committee on this item. It was an exhaustive presentation, and we know everything we need to know about it now. So I would look for a motion to approve.
So moved, Mr.
I have a motion from Vice Chair Carlton, a second from Senator Dennis. Any discussion on the motion?
You'll be getting a call from me.
Excuse me. Yeah. Do we have any discussion on the motion?
No.
You got me all confused there, Vice Chair. Seeing none, all in favor, aye.
Aye.
Everybody on Zoom is an aye as well, and all opposed, nay. And the motion carries unanimously with the members present. Thank you, Ms. Campbell, and thank you to the housing team for presenting that. And that moves us to our next item, 25. And we probably are going to have many of the same team presenting that one. That's Account for Low-Income Housing, Work Program C54754. And who was going to present that? Was it Mr. Acroft? Yeah, and if we could transition back over to Mr. Acroft's screen, please.
Good morning again, Chair Brooks, Vice Chair Carlton, members of the committee. For the record, Steve Acroft, Administrator of the Housing Division, and with me today is Michael Holliday. Thank you for your time and consideration of the acceptance of emergency rental assistance funds provided in the American Rescue Plan. And this rental assistance, which I'm going to refer to as ERA2 moving forward. So again, apologies, but this is the alphabet soup that we live in. Provided to the entire state of Nevada through the American Rescue Plan is $185.4 million. $86 million of that will be provided to local jurisdictions, and $98.8 million will be provided to the state. The ARP required Treasury to disperse 40% of each grantee's grant within 60 days of the enactment of the ARP, and that 40% represents the $39.5 million to be approved here. The remaining funds are to be released in tranches, as determined by the Secretary of Treasury, only when 75% of the funds previously provided by the Treasury had been obligated. Our plan is to utilize these funds similar to what you are currently seeing with the ERA1 funds, which were provided by the Consolidated Appropriations Act. And if you recall, these previously approved funds were designed to be used for rent, rental arrears, utilities, home energy costs, and arrearages for those at 80% or less of area median income who had experienced unemployment, COVID hardship, or were at risk of experiencing homelessness. There are certain benchmarks which need to be met with the ERA1 funds, and to prevent any recapture of those funds based on a failure to meet those benchmarks, the primary source of rental assistance funding will continue to be ERA1, with initial ERA2 funds being provided to renters if necessary based on some subtle eligibility differences between the two programs, which allow for greater flexibility. For example, ERA1 funds need to be tied to financial hardship experienced due to COVID, whereas ERA2 funds need to be tied to financial hardship which occurred during the COVID outbreak timeframe. So just a subtle little difference. If an applicant could not tie their hardship back to COVID, but it occurred during the past 16 months, they wouldn't be eligible for ERA1 funding, but they would be for ERA2. And that's who we're looking to capture here. We have continued to work with our subgrantees, Clark County Social Services, the Reno Housing Authority, and Nevada Rural Housing Authority in dispensing these funds. And in conjunction, we have regular meetings with the governor's office, the treasurer, those entities which I just mentioned, the state Supreme Court, the eviction mediation program, Home Means Nevada, and we will continue that. And with that high-level overview, we'll stand ready to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Acroft. Do we have any questions from the committee on this work program? Assemblywoman Hadegui?
And just one, Chair. And Director Acroft, so I just had one quick question. It's just more my clarification. During our legislative session, we had a hearing on AB 486, which dealt with setting up the assistance for the landlords. And during that hearing, I remember them saying that we had in total in the state $360 million for rental assistance. Is that part of this 185.5 million, or are we getting 185.5 million on top of the 360 million?
Steve Acroft, for the record, great question. Basically, you did hear that in testimony. That is inclusive of these funds. And actually what has been provided, because Clark County is considered a high needs area, they are Clark County, the county of Clark County jurisdiction is receiving an additional 20 million. So the total through these two programs will actually be 380 million.
Thank you. Assemblyman Miller?
Thank you, Chair. Quick question just regarding the ERA2 and how it's distributed as far as we know that the previous went directly to landlords or, utilities, but this goes, it can be applied or given directly to the tenant. So how do we ensure that once it's given to them, it's going to be used as intended?
Steve Acroft for the record. You're absolutely correct. It is actually a requirement for the acceptance of these funds that we allow direct to tenant assistance. To go back to a question that was asked in the previous item, how do we work to prevent fraud that will occur? So we can rely on written attestments, but we do a waterfall through that process, looking for, or our sub-grantees will, looking for documentation regarding eligibility, leases, things of that nature. And we will continue to work with the sub-grantees to make sure that that is going to occur. Those discussions are happening right now, but I don't have a specific way to say that, oh, this is what we're going to do. My opinion is that we're basically going to, if we're going to allow that, we are going to do some verification on the landlord end to make sure that what the tenant is identifying as the landlord is in fact the owner of that property.
Thank you. Quick follow-up here. So in understanding that maybe the decision to allow these to be direct payments to the tenants to allow them to handle their business with their landlords, I understand that there may have been some issue with landlords not wanting to take direct payments. So the goal, I believe, is to allow the tenant to rectify their situation without the landlord necessarily having to participate in how that money is acquired. So do we expect that landlords are going to, because this then would just based off what you mentioned, would require the landlord to then be abreast of how the tenant has acquired the money to pay and, may or may not choose to respond to an inquiry confirming that they used it as intended. So, I understand we don't have it quite figured out yet, but I think it's really important that we really figure out how we get the money, make sure that the money is used as intended, and so that we don't have any fraud or waste with it. Thank you.
Steve Acroft for the record. I don't envision that it will require landlord interaction to be funded. And again, as you mentioned, this is a little bit of a work in progress, but we should be able to obtain that information. And then there will be attestments by the tenant that in fact they will be using this funding for specifically rent. That's a requirement in the Treasury guidance.
Thank you, Assemblyman. Thank you, Mr. Acroft. I have a question as well from Assemblywoman Peters.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you, Mr. Acroft. I was wondering if you could provide us with a status update on the ERA1 program and how many households have been provided rent and utility assistance to date.
Thank you, Steve Acroft, for the record. I don't know that I have a specific answer to your question, but I can provide an overview of all the rental assistance. So if we go back to the CARES Act and the CRF funding, that was initially provided. We did $30 million of state funding, along with some that was done in Reno, Washoe, Clark County, Las Vegas, et cetera. So that was roughly, in Clark County, they provided 97.8 million, and that's in both rental assistance and some administration. And with those CRF funds, because they were a little bit more flexible, they were able to provide bulk payments to landlords. So I don't have specific numbers on those, the number of households funded there. In Clark County's ERA2 program, from what I can gather with what they have reported, and again, they report back to the local jurisdictions and they provide some funding through the state, although I know that they have not used state funding yet to provide for their residents. They have another 30 million plus on top of that. So they've done 131 million. The Reno Housing Authority, again, through CARES funding and ERA funding, has done 9.6 million. And the rurals, again, through CARES funding and through ERA funding, have done 4.9 million. So total assistance going out currently, well, as of May 31st, that was reported to me, has been over 145 million. And unfortunately, I can give you the bulk number, but I don't have the number of households because of the disparate reporting that has to be done back to the local entities, not necessarily to the state.
Thank you for that overview. I would be curious to see how many households we've been able to support with these dollars as they've come in. So if there's any way that we could get access to that, that would be helpful, I think, in understanding how successful these programs are and how we are looking at moving forward in the future with expending these for our hardworking Nevada families.
Steve Acroft, for the record, I will reach back out and try to obtain that information best I can to you.
Thank you, Assemblywoman Peters, and thank you, Mr. Acroft. Do we have any other questions on this item?
Just one.
Vice Chair Carlton?
And thank you very much. And not as much a question, but a comment. This rental assistance, we're coming at it very analytically. This has changed people's lives. I've had people call, I've had people bring me cookies and cakes and send cards, and their kids draw pictures about how grateful they are that they are still living where they were before and their kids can go back to the same school. So we come at this from an IFC perspective and a money perspective, but this has made, I think, one of the biggest differences in family stability in this state over the last year. And I'll just comment that in the world that I live in, we had to initiate a safeguard. Every check that goes out, we now have to confirm with the bank to make sure that that check actually gets to the landlord. We did have a couple get cashed inappropriately and the dollars get used not in the way they were intended, and we had consequences for that person and those families. But there are ways to institute a check on the back end to make sure that each time you send the money out, that you can verify it through the bank, that can be done. So there are ways to build in accountability. And I understand wanting to get the money directly to the clients, but there are times where that just can be a little bit scary because the client is uncomfortable with it too, and having to deal with that. So thank you very much for all the work that you've done and Clark County has done on taking care of this. And I look forward to getting all those numbers in the future from you on this that Ms. Peters asked for. I think it's very important for us to understand the impact to the state that this has had. Thank you.
Well, it seems as if I was wrong. We've got Tolles, Ratty, and Benitez Thompson still want to talk. So we'll start with Tolles. Assemblywoman Tolles.
Thank you so much, Chair, and hopefully you can hear me. I was just curious how we came up with the distribution between Clark and Washoe. I do see that we've included the additional 20.8 million for designation as a high need area to Clark, but combined total with Clark and City of Henderson, Las Vegas, North Las Vegas, I calculate out that that's about little over 40 to 41% of the allocation. But with City of Reno receiving 3.3% and Washington County receiving 2.8%, that's only 6.1%. So I just wondered if you could walk me through how we decided on those proportions. Thanks.
Thank you for the question, Assemblywoman Tolles. Actually, those are determined via the Treasury. So we did not have any input into those funding numbers at all. So those are provided direct to the local jurisdictions, and the local jurisdictions will in turn provide rental assistance for their residents in their respective cities. That has been done and established with the current rental assistance, ERA 1, and the CRF funding through the two entities that we're discussing. The Treasury determined those numbers, and the Treasury determined that the minimum payment to the state was going to be $98 million. At this point, we have not determined exactly how we are going to divide up that $98 million because we're still looking at making sure we hit the benchmarks in ERA 1 funding first. Although we do anticipate providing some funding for those who may not be eligible under ERA 1, provide them some ERA 2 dollars, primarily probably to Nevada Rural going out because they're requiring, or they only receive the state funding, where the other jurisdictions can use some of that local funding that you discussed. Hope that answers your question.
Thank you. And I too will be curious to see the reports back on those allocations. I think that might help provide more clarity. Thanks.
Thank you. And I believe we have a question from Senator Ratty.
Nothing here.
Oh, okay. And Assemblywoman Benitez Thompson, did you have a question as well?
It's just a really quick one, Chairman Brooks, and just along the lines of the questions that I typically ask. And so we know that there's a change in who the funding can be paid for, who the benefit can be dispersed to, and a little bit of a change in the amount of the percentage that's going to be used for administrative versus direct benefits. But in terms of the application process, is there any change? I know there were, I think, a couple different versions that we saw in the first round of rental assistance money versus how we got guidance back in January. And so are there any other changes from the applicant's perspective of how this will work?
Steve Acroft for the record. Great question. And I believe the process will remain the same. I can see some of the questions being asked a little differently, but that's probably going to be further in the application process, is just kind of, I think, through this, because Treasury designed the program so that it mirrors ERA 1, but there are, as we have talked about, some subtle differences. So I think that's sort of getting into, as the applicant goes through the process, to determine whether they will be eligible, because we want to get them in ERA 1 first. And if for some reason that application, while it might be valid for ERA 2, that's when it would get switched over, or additional questions would be asked to make sure they qualify for the ERA 2 funding.
Thank you, Mr. Acroft, and thank you for the question, Assemblywoman. Do we have any other questions or comments from the committee on this work program? It looks as if we do not, so I would take a motion to approve item 25, the work program C54754.
So moved.
I have a motion from Vice Chair Carlton, a second from Senator Dennis. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all in favor, aye.
Aye.
And if we could check our Zoom participants? Broadcast, I still don't see our members on Zoom. There they go. And they all have their hands up, so all opposed, nay. And so the motion carries unanimously, passes unanimously with the members present. And we can move on to our next agenda items, which are going to be 39 and 60, which we're going to take together. And they're both, well, before we get started on that, though, just want to give a little bit of update on some housekeeping items. We will be taking a break somewhere between 12:30 and 1 o'clock for a quick lunch. And so just to make sure that the agency folks who are working with us today to get through IFC kind of are aware of our time frame, we're taking the items that were pulled in order, and then we'll have that break, and then we'll come back. And also members and also agency folk that are assisting us today, if we can be as concise as possible with our questions and with our answers. It is 11:45. We are maybe a third of the way through this agenda, so we need to kind of speed it up a little bit. And so with that, we'll jump into items 39 and 60. And we have, I think we have Ms. Peak here, and to start us off on item 39, and then we'll move into 60, or take them together.
Good morning, Chair Brooks.
Morning.
Still morning a little bit. And members of the Interim Finance Committee, my name is Julia Peak, and I serve as one of the Deputy Administrators with the Division of Public and Behavioral Health. I'm joined by Lily Helzer with our Bureau of Child, Family, and Community Wellness, who's going to oversee this award, and joined remotely with our partners Tina Dorch and Sheila Lambert with the Director's Office. And I'll just note these ladies worked very, very hard on this award, so they are ready to answer some questions if you have any. So today we're requesting authority for the new grant from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention's National Initiative to Address COVID-19 Health Disparities among populations at high risk and underserved, including racial and ethnic minority populations and rural communities. As I noted, this grant is funded through the CDC through the Coronavirus Response and Relief Supplemental Appropriations Act of 2021. This groundbreaking funding represents CDC's largest investment to date, focusing specifically on reducing health disparities related to COVID-19, and will provide much needed support to directly address these issues in our communities. Nevada did receive over $32 million for this award, and it runs from June 1st, 2021 to May 31st, 2023. The purpose of this funding initiative is to address COVID-19 related health disparities and advance health equity by expanding state, local, U.S. territorial, and other state health department capacity. There are some intended outcomes that include to reduce COVID-19 related health disparities, improve and increase testing and contact tracing among populations at higher risk and that are underserved, improve state health department capacity and services to prevent and control COVID-19 infection or transmission among populations at higher risk that are underserved, again, including racial and ethnic minority groups and people living in our rural communities. There are mandatory program strategies, including to expand existing and or develop new mitigation and prevention resources and services to reduce COVID-19 related disparities among populations at higher risk and the underserved, increase or improve data collection and reporting for populations experiencing a disproportionate burden of COVID-19 infection, severe illness, and death to guide the response to the COVID-19 pandemic. Build, leverage, and expand infrastructure support for COVID-19 prevention and control among populations that are higher risk and underserved. And then last, to mobilize partners and collaborators to advance health equity and address social determinants of health as they relate to COVID-19 health disparities among populations at higher risk that are underserved. As you can appreciate, this is a very large grant with multiple parts. So in order to implement this program successfully, there are many, many partners on this award. I'll just speak really briefly about some of those partners. We're going to be working with the Office of Rural Health from the School of Medicine to develop and conduct monthly ECHO program trainings or online trainings for rural health professionals, local health professionals, and we're going to cover a variety of COVID-19 related topics. We're also going to be working with the Office of Rural Health and the State Public Health Laboratory and University, Department of Pathology and Laboratory Medicine to partner with some of our rural partners and those entities supporting our underserved. That includes the rural hospital partners, our federally qualified health centers or FQHCs, rural health clinics, rural hospitals. We're also working with our sister agency at the Division of Child and Family Services. Primarily, their work is going to be around technology advancement and infrastructure, but certainly we're also going to work with them on community coordination for vaccine administration and other items. Very excited to work with the Healthy Communities Coalition, who also supports our Community Health Workers Association. We're going to be expanding community health workers and promotorists throughout the state. It's a really great program that really brings people into the public health workforce and hires people from the community to serve the community. It's a great program. We're going to be working with our Nevada Cancer Coalition. Ms. Carrie Harrington presented during public comment, but I'll just echo what she said she'll do, but they're going to be working for cancer prevention, which is a known comorbidity issue with COVID-19. Also working with the Tobacco Prevention Coalition, the Office of Minority Health and Equity in our director's office, our grant management unit in the director's office, and I'll just note that they're going to be working with that specifically expanding existing mitigation resources, and they're going to be working with our family resource centers throughout the state, and they provide great social service supports as well. I just want to note they're going to connect economically vulnerable families with support, food assistance, employment, family activity kits, healthcare, and other services. So really a great partnership for our public health efforts. Going to be working with our Bureau of Behavioral Health, Wellness, and Prevention, specifically looking at addressing health disparities for our populations that are higher risk and medically underserved as it relates to behavioral health services. We're going to provide multicultural training for the behavioral health workforce and expand workforce development again in behavioral health, mobilize partners to advance health equity, specifically providing training and technical assistance. A couple of other projects, really happy to hear Nevada 211 mentioned earlier is a resource to help direct people for social services and health outcomes. That resource needs promotion. People need to know it's available. And so that's one of the deliverables of this effort. Also working with the Nevada Broadcasters Association to specifically target our populations at higher risk and partnering with our mobile medical units. Again, thank you for hearing this work program today. Thank you for letting me speak to it a little bit, and we are happy to answer questions that you may have.
Thank you, Ms. Peak. I appreciate that. I think we do have some questions from the committee. Assemblywoman Gorlow, did you have a question on this particular issue? Or okay. Then I think I have up next is Senator Ratty.
Thank you, Chair. First question is, so that was a wonderful list of community partners representing all parts of our community. That also sounds a little bit like herding cats. So how are you going to approach oversight and coordination of all those partners?
Senator Addy, thank you for the question. Julia Peak for the record. I would say one of the things that public health does well is herd cats. We've presented in front of you all before about how public health really utilizes a variety of services in the community to ultimately address social determinants and help people navigate that system. So really within our bailiwick, but how are we going to do it specifically? We are hiring staff to oversee this. Also later on your agenda, we're going to be talking about the workforce grant. That's a complement to this, and that we are going to be hiring staff to help us manage it. The COVID response in general has been a level of herding cats that has been really unprecedented for public health, but I think we're ready to do this. We've also done a lot of work as we see the applications coming forward and different entities that are able to apply. We've been partnering with them to look at their applications. I just want to mention Sheila Lambert specifically, who worked with Southern Nevada Health District and our other partners in Clark County because they received a similar grant. So spent a whole lot of work to make sure we're crosswalking those and not duplicating or supplanting anything. But no small undertaking by any means, but I think we're well suited to herd those cats.
Great, thank you. And just 2 follow-ups if I can, Chair Brooks.
Please go ahead.
So my understanding is the Southern Nevada Health District receives this same funding or similar funding directly. So how will you coordinate to make sure that there isn't overlap and duplication with one direct funded agency?
Julia Peak for the record, again, great question. And so what we did is during their application, again, Sheila Lambert with the director's office, as she was helping us write this award, also was reviewing their application. So we know what they're submitting for and making sure that we're not duplicative and that we're complementary. But if things change, again, they do over the course of a grant implementation, it's ongoing communication with those entities to make sure that we aren't duplicating. Sheila, I don't know if you have anything else to add on that.
No, thank you, Julia. I will just say that as part of the Director's Office with the Office of Minority Health and Equity, that part of the deliverables in there is to work with the communities throughout the state. And Southern Nevada Health District, of course, is one of those key community providers. So we will be working with them collaboratively as we go along so that we are all aware of the various intricacies and what we're working on under each program.
Thank you. And then just one final question, and Ms. Peak, this one's perhaps a little bit pointed, but I think we've done an amazing job in public health of herding cats and lots of collaboration and community partnership and good work and amazing work during the pandemic, and I commend your team. Maybe where we haven't always succeeded is on the issue of disparate impact and reaching out to communities who don't perhaps traditionally participate in some of the stakeholder groups that we regularly see at the table. And so while we want to build on the successes that we have had, we also want to do a better job specifically on health equity, specifically on disparate impact. And so can you just describe a little bit how we're going to take significant step forwards, given that this is the point of this funding and this grant is to make sure that we are focusing on health equity, disparate impact, and perhaps communities we haven't had a great track record of reaching in the past.
Julia Peak for the record, and Senator Addy, that's pointed but appropriate. And I think that's something that we need to look at. I think one of the things that we've looked at in the past is continuing to fund our Office of Minority Health and Equity and supporting our Minority Health and Equity Coalition. There are several things that we have tried to do in public health, including utilizing community health workers and other efforts, but I do think Tina's probably best to answer this question, so I'll hand it off to her and let her cover that.
Thank you, through the chair, to Senator Ratty for that question. What I can tell you, Senator, is that it's almost like we've been training for this moment. I've been with the agency, the state, since 2018, and the Office of Minority Health and Equity has been cultivating these relationships since that moment going forward. And so we have established track records. We've already got some very strong relationships, and we can activate those on a higher level, as Julia mentioned, with the additional support and staff that can be now more focused. But I think that is the best way that I can just explain being able to activate the next phases for a grant of this size with as many moving pieces that we have been preparing for this for quite some time.
And if I could just quickly follow up, Ms. George, your office is being called upon in not just this effort, but in several other things that happened during the legislative session. What's your plan to scale up to be able to meet all of the tasks that you have been given?
Thank you, Mr. Through the chair, to the senator. Again, going back to planning, we began planning for this particular activity at the beginning of the legislative session. My advisory committee is a very committed group of individuals, and we are led by a legislative advisor, Senator Patricia Spearman, who gave us fair warning that this was going to be the season of equity. And so as these ideas and as these concepts started taking form from BDR through, I think we're talking about a lot of legislation, Senator, that has come through the pipeline, there's lots of crosswalk. And so we are literally looking at this from a very, very comprehensive standpoint as to how those different legislative pieces will work in tandem without supplanting resources to be able to achieve that infrastructure. One of those examples you may be referring to, Senator, is work that's coming out of the governor's office through Senate Bill 424. And we will see a new office for public health resources in the governor's office, and my office will get one grant or general funded staff person as a result. These positions are at their core designed to look at the bigger picture and to look at the total pieces that are moving and to make sure that they are working in tandem.
Thank you for the discussion, Chair.
Thank you. And do we have any other questions from the committee on this? Vice Chair Carlton?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and I really appreciate all the work that's laid out here. But, you know, as I go through it, just coming from the world that I'm coming with, I'm looking at this in our notes, the breakout of underlying social determinants of health disparities, at-risk and underserved communities, and then I'm looking at some of the examples that were given of the activities and some of the coordinating agencies. And I'd just like to point out something that I think is glaringly absent in this is the impact on what food insecurity has had to this state over, it's had a light shown on it for the last year, but it has been an ongoing problem for a very long time in the state. And, you know, I totally appreciate wanting to look at cancer prevention and, you know, dealing with things through the chronic disease budget, but one of the biggest problems we have in the state, the largest chronic disease is diabetes, and a lot of that comes through diet. So just my own personal plug, as you guys move forward and start looking at some of these things, I don't see anything in here that deals with food insecurity, diet, healthy eating, things along that line. And I'll just tell you, to provide fresh fruits and vegetables to the food pantry that I'm with it's $500 a week for us to buy good fresh food for folks. I mean, we could buy a lot of other stuff, but we choose to buy that because we want to make sure that the folks who come to us get healthy food. But yet when I go through all these different components and these social determinants, I don't see that anywhere. So I'm just hoping to put that on your radar so that it can be considered in the future, because on top of all that, we have food deserts especially in Clark County, but I know across the whole state, there are food deserts. So there's a lot of different components to the health disparities, and I'd just like to place that one on your radar. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Do we have any other questions on these two items? All right, seeing none, I would take a motion to approve both of these items. Second. And I have a motion from Senator Dennis, a second from Vice Chair Carlton. Any discussion on that motion? Seeing none, all in favor, aye. Aye. And it looks like everybody on Zoom is affirmative. Opposed, nay. And the motion carries unanimously with the members present. And we can move on to, and it's funny because I'm still kind of like stuck in session mode, wanting to assign floor statements. And so.
What time is floor?
It's amazing how quickly we snap right back into our conditioning. And that takes us to our next agenda items, 48 and 49, which are from the Department of Health and Human Services, Aging and Disability Services, both of those items. And we have with us Dina Schmidt to hear both of those items. And if you wanted to come up and present those for us briefly, I would appreciate that.
Good afternoon, Chairman Brooks and members of the committee. Dina Schmidt for the record, and I serve as the Administrator for Aging and Disability Services Division. The two work programs we have before you today, item 48 is requesting a reduction in Medicaid revenue authority for the Autism Treatment Assistance Program. This reduction is related to The fact that we no longer bill on behalf of our providers, that our providers are now all enrolled and bill directly to the Medicaid program. And the second item is number 49, which is requesting additional authority for CAT 16, which is the TANF funding for direct services in the Autism Treatment Assistance Program. And it really is just to align our authority with our revised projections. I think we did a work program a while back, and we reduced the authority, because the projections were on a downward trend, and we've seen a little bit of a change. So this is just realigning that authority to use the TANF dollars to provide services in our Autism Treatment Assistance Program. So with that, we are happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you. And I'm not sure if you're on Zoom or on the phone, but we cannot see you on the screen. And in broadcast services, if we could bring up Ms. Schmidt's screen, that'd help us, I think, a little bit. But I want to, there we are. Thank you. Appreciate it. And I think that Assemblywoman Benitez Thompson, did you have a question?
Thank you, Chair Brooks. I did, and I appreciate it. And I know that we've been talking a lot about these caseloads and then come right out of session and we're right back talking about these caseloads, which I appreciate so much. So the agency currently projects an average monthly caseload of about 906 children and at an average monthly cost of about $304. Which looks to be lower than the projections that were used to determine the budget rejection for the 31st special session. And then we've had some revisions to that, I think. And so I guess, can you talk to us a little bit about what the current caseload trends are looking like for the Autism Treatment Assistance Program?
So Dina Schmidt for the record. So yes, well, during special session, we did have a downward trend. I think as we mentioned during regular session, a lot of that we believe was related to COVID and underutilization of services. I don't have our current caseload projections, but the last ones provided during session did show an uptake in services and an expected increase in utilization. And we haven't seen any trends that I'm aware of in the last couple of months since our last caseload projections that are any different than that, but we are happy to provide the committee with any follow-up information and updated caseload projections for the Autism Treatment Assistance Program.
Thank you. And did you have any further questions, Assemblywoman Benitez Thompson, or is that?
I think I do, because and we were doing some fancy work there at the end of session to make sure that this was lining all up. And if he's not there, a big shout out to Mr. Young, who was quickly revising and working on fiscal notes for us. But it looks like with the ATAP program was approved for 4.2 million, but only 2.1 million was budgeted. But then there's additional 1.7 million that remain in TANF reserves that can be used. So I guess, are we gonna end up in a spot? Well, I guess you'll let us know when you come back to us if we're in a spot where there's gonna have to be additional funds to support the program as caseload tells us what our needs are.
Dina Schmidt for the record, that's correct. So the 4.2 was for fiscal year 21. And so there were some funds that were unutilized that went back to this, just stay in the TANF reserve of the TANF dollars that we received. Is what I think you're referring to, is that 4.2 was what we were anticipating using in TANF in fiscal year 21, but we had not utilized all of that. So a portion of that was just remained in the TANF reserve funds. And then yes, for the new fiscal years, the new biennium, we have, we believe that our budget will cover the projections, but obviously if we run into any type of opportunity where we might be looking at a wait list, we will certainly be coming back to this committee to inform you and let you know.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Assemblywoman, and thank you, Ms. Schmidt. Do we have any other questions from the committee on these two? All right. With that, so we have no further questions. So with that, I would take a motion to approve items 48 and 49. And that's work programs C54192 and C54380. I have a motion from Vice Chair Carlton, second from Senator Dennis. Any discussion on the motion? I do not see any. So all in favor, aye. Aye. Including, let me see who's on Zoom with the members, please. All right, all the members are at aye, and any opposed, nay? And the motion passes unanimously with the members present. And we can move on to our next agenda item, which is agenda item G65. We're actually not an agenda item, but our next item we want to discuss is G65. And that is Department of Health and Human Services, Welfare and Supportive Services. And we'll be discussing work program C54456. And with us this morning or afternoon at this point, I think we have Mr. Fisher to help present that for us.
Sure. Good afternoon, Mr. Chair. Can you see me okay? Hear me okay?
Yep, we can see you. Thank you, sir.
Fantastic. Well, good morning, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. For the record, my name is Steve Fisher, and I serve as the administrator for the Division of Welfare and Supportive Services. And with me this morning on Zoom is Robert Thompson. He's the Deputy Administrator of Field Operations, and also Sherry Gallucci. She's our SNAP Program Specialist in case there are any questions the committee might have. Agenda item 65 is requesting $4,888,015 in federal Continuing Appropriations Act Food and Nutrition Services Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, or SNAP, Pandemic Electronic Benefit Transfer, or PEBT, grant funds for the continuation of the PEBT issuance to eligible school-age children. So what I'd like to do at this point is just kind of give you a brief overview of the program. So the PEBT program provides temporary emergency nutrition benefits to children who would have received free or reduced priced meals through the National School Lunch Program and the School Breakfast Program. Children are eligible to receive a refund for the cost of the school's free and reduced lunches that were missed due to COVID-related school closures. So the program is funded 100% through USDA Food Nutrition Services Pandemic Electronic Benefits Transfer Program, which is offered to the states. The act in and of itself also made several significant changes. They expanded the PEBT program to also cover child care age children, so children age 0 to 6, in the months that they were receiving SNAP from October 2020 through June of 2021. And the act is also providing full administrative funding, and that's why we're here today. We're asking for approval of the $4.8 million in administrative costs. We estimate that we will issue over $523 million in benefits to over approximately 395,000 Nevada children for the 2020-2021 school year. These administrative funds in this request will be used for things like vendor costs. We need to make system enhancements, system changes. They need to be modified in order to be able to distribute these benefits electronically. We're going to stand up a call center specifically for PEBT. There's other estimated costs, our EBT vendor for issuing these cards and so on and so forth. So those are the administrative costs that are built into this. Certainly some of these costs were estimated at the time, and therefore certainly we'll be coming back to this committee in the future to request any sort of additional authority that we might need to cover actual costs. I think it's important to note too that the American Rescue Plan, or ARPA, they also added to the PEBT program what's called the summer PBD program. So we will also be coming back before this committee to request any sort of additional authority to cover any administrative costs to issue what we call summer PBT benefits as well. Just to share kind of a high level timeline with regards to when these benefits will be issued. Certainly, we're working on the system enhancements as we speak, and those system enhancements will be completed right around mid to late August. We will issue the first set of benefits September 10th. Those benefits will cover the month of August 2020 through November of 2020. That's September 10th. Then a month later, in October, we will do another issuance on October 10th. And those benefits will cover the months of December 2020 through February of 2021. And then again in November, on November 10th, we will issue the remaining benefits, which would cover the months of March 2021 through the end of the school year, June 2021. So that provides you with a kind of a high-level overview of the timeline on getting these benefits issued. And with that, Mr. Chair, I'll open it up for any questions the committee might have.
I have a question from Senator Kiekefer, and then we'll go to Vice Chair Carlton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, Mr. Fisher, you talked about those dates. Those are the eligibility windows from the pandemic. So we're going to be paying out those benefits based on those prior eligibility windows, right? Is that, did I hear you correctly? You're talking. Go ahead.
For the record, Steve Fisher, it's yes, to Senator Kiekefer, it's retro. So we're looking back. And we're getting that data and that information from the Nevada Department of Education. They'll be providing that information to us so we know which children will receive benefits under which months and so on and so forth. So I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, it does. It does. Thank you. And my second question, Mr. Chairman, if I may, when you talk about the additional summer benefits, are those designed to fund the summer that we're currently in, or last summer, so the summer of 2020 or the summer of 2021?
For the record, Steve Fisher, it's for this summer, the current summer that we're in.
And then when would benefits be paid out for the current summer?
December.
In December.
We're going to do September. We're going to issue last year's school year benefits first and foremost. That'll happen in September, October, November, and then in December, we'll issue the summer benefits.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Vice Chair Carlton?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Senator, for clarifying that with Mr. Fisher. It's nice to see you, Mr. Fisher. And I'm glad to hear about these. So what kind of program are you going to put together so parents understand exactly what they're getting is one of the main questions that I have. But the thing I'd like to address first is last summer during one of our special sessions, we had an IFC meeting where this first round of funding went out. And those cards were going to a lot of folks. And there were a number of questions about why they were getting cards when they weren't SNAP benefits. We just sent cards to each family to coordinate with the children. So this is an extension of that program. And we got some pushback from folks who said, I don't have SNAP, I don't need SNAP, my kids don't go to a Title I school. Why did I get a SNAP card in the mail, and can I give it back? What do I do with it? We were lucky that some folks bought food and donated it. But there was a lot of confusion, and we understood why you did it. You had to get the money out quick. It was all about feeding families, so that was great. But here we are a year later. Are there some safeguards built into this to make sure that these cards get to the correct families and it's not just a blanket, send it out to every kid in the school district sort of thing? And then my follow-up to that, it will be, when we did send those cards out, if families did not use them, where did those unused dollars end up? And do those end up counting against Nevada? in any way for us having unused SNAP dollars. So I just want to look at the problem we had last time and to see how this new program is going to address those to make sure the money gets in the right place and move on from there. I hope I didn't make that too confusing.
If I may, I'm going to ask Sherry Colucci to see if she can answer that questions.
Good afternoon, Sherry Gallucci, SNAP Program Specialist for the state of Nevada. For the record, I can absolutely address those concerns. The subset of individuals that you are referring to were families that were in community eligibility provision schools or provision 2 schools. Those families, although we did put out a flyer stating that individuals who were in community eligibility provision schools and provision 2 schools would be eligible for PEBT, I don't believe that that document was sent out, widely enough for every single recipient to understand. I can tell you this year we are preparing another set of Q&As, questions and answers. We have engaged with the schools and school districts. We've been engaged with them for the past almost 6 months now, kind of explaining these processes. So for the children that are in community eligibility provision schools, they're automatically enrolled and eligible for the National Free and Reduced Lunch Program, which means these children were truly eligible. We didn't just inadvertently send all of these cards to families that were not eligible. They absolutely were eligible for the benefits. Also, as Steve mentioned, we are going to stand up a vendor call center. This vendor call center is going to be specifically targeted and only for PEBT related questions. With the vendor call center, I will be assisting with the script, and we will absolutely address all of the concerns from last year and the lessons learned. I hope that answers your question.
And thank you very much. Yes, it does answer a number of them. I guess my follow-up question is, with some of the folks that got those cards last time, and with folks who might be getting cards this time, if they decide not to use those dollars because they don't feel like their family should take advantage of that for whatever reason, what is the process if those dollars are left on the card? We know they don't come to unclaimed property because they're federal dollars. If those dollars are not accessed, does that count against Nevada in any way in the future for not accessing all of our SNAP dollars that were made available to us? I just want to make sure that we don't inadvertently cause a problem down the road with SNAP, because we understand how important these dollars are to families even before the pandemic and still will be after the pandemic.
Robert Thompson, for the record, there is no negative impact to Nevada if those cards go unused. Any recipient of SNAP can stop using their card at any time, and after I believe it's a 9-month period. Excuse me, I do believe it's a 9-month period right now. We revert those dollars back to the federal government, back to FNS.
And thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to make sure, it sounds like a lot of safeguards are being put into this next program, and I greatly appreciate that. We understand totally you had to get the money out to these families as quickly as possible last summer, but I'm glad you're building in the call center and the summer program to make sure, and all the public information that's going to need to get to these families so that they understand these dollars are available. And thank you for picking the 10th of the month, because that's the last day for food stamps or for SNAP. So thanks for picking that day rather than the 1st, 2nd, or 3rd. I have family that works in a grocery store, and you don't want to go in a grocery store on the 1st, 2nd, or 3rd. So thank you very much for picking the 10th.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Do we have any other questions from the committee on this item? All right. Thank you, Mr. Fisher, Mr. Thompson, and Ms. Gallucci. And with that, I would take a motion to approve item 65, which is work program 654456. I have a motion from Vice Chair Carlton, a second from Senator Dennis. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all in favor, aye.
Aye.
And it looks as if all of our members on Zoom have their hand up. So any opposed, nay? And the motion passes unanimously with the members present. And we can move on to our next agenda item, which is item 98. Item 98, we made a revision to. Oh, I'm sorry. Item 98, we were going to pull, Senator Gocochea had some questions on. And so let me go over to that item.
Yeah, just in the interest of, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Of Corrections, the Ely Conservation Camp. All right.
I don't know if they're up, but just in the interest of time, we continue to budget this camp. It's been closed for over a year, still closed. And my questions are we anticipating opening it, or what's the story?
All right, and we have from the Department of Corrections.
Good afternoon, Chair Brooks, Vice Chair.
Good afternoon.
Carlton,
Please
and
go.
honorable members of the committee. This is Adrienne Monroe for the record. I'm the Assistant Chief of Fiscal for the Department of Corrections and currently the acting chief. I can tell you that it is the intentions of the Department of Corrections to reopen the camp. I can't give you an exact date and time, but we are grateful for and appreciate the ongoing patience of the legislature. And Senator, I can tell you that we are working with Workforce Connection and Theater to post our vacancies, and we understand our commitment and the expectation if we're not able to reopen within the first 3 months of fiscal 22. So it is absolutely one of our highest hiring priorities for the department. And if you have any other questions, I'd be happy to entertain them.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And so then we are, the first quarter of 22, we say it will be open. And I'm just looking for a time frame. Clearly, we're stretching ththose camps, Pioche and Wells, trying to meet those fuel reduction contracts that NDF has got in place. They're not getting done. And we're moving into the heart of the fire season. So again, we continue to budget it, but the camp is still closed. So thank you, Mr. Chair. And with that, I'll make a motion if that's what you want.
Any other questions on this agenda item for the Department of Corrections? All right, thank you, Ms. Monroe. I appreciate the clarification on that. And Senator Gocochea, if you want to make a motion.
Move to approve the deletion of $412,297, item 98. Thank you.
All right, I have a motion from Senator Gocochea. I have a second from Vice Chair Carlton. Any discussion on that motion? Seeing none, all in favor, aye. And we have everyone on Zoom is yes. And so all opposed, nay. And the motion passes unanimously with the members present. And now we can move on to, we have one of the items that we made revision to earlier was item 105. And 105 was a transfer of $60,000, and we revised that, and that was to $115,000 as described by Mr. Thorley earlier on. So I need a motion to approve that item.
So moved.
I have a motion from Vice Chair Carlton, a second from Senator Dennis. Any discussion on that motion? Seeing none, all in favor, aye. And if we can go to our members on Zoom, we lost that screen. There we are, and they're all ayes. Any opposed, nay? And motion passes unanimously with the members present. And we can go on to our next item, which I believe is 126. And 126 is from the Department of Health and Human Services. And with us this morning, or this afternoon, I should say, we have, Ms. Peak again to help us with this item. And Ms. Peak, if you want to go ahead.
Perfect, thank you. Good afternoon, Chair Brooks and members of the Interim Finance Committee. My name is Julia Peak and I serve as one of the Deputy Administrators with the Division of Public and Behavioral Health. I'm joined by my colleague, Debbie Reynolds, who also serves as a Deputy Administrator. Work Program C54827 is a work program to add a new cooperative agreement for emergency response public health crisis response. At DPBH, we have referred to this grant as our workforce grant because it is one of the most flexible federal funding received by the division to meet the staffing needs that have been identified as a result of COVID. This grant is for over $19 million for 2 years. It is starting on July 1st, 2021 and ending on June 30th, 2023. It is allowable to charge for expenses that were incurred on or after May 14th, but the division does not plan to backbill any expenses at this point. We are still awaiting more detailed guidance and reporting templates from our partners at the CDC, but based on the information received to date, this funding is really directed to do 3 things. Either direct COVID response staffing directly, provide for staffing gaps that have been identified as a result of our COVID response, and really support public health pipeline staffing and support efforts. The detailed work plan and final budget for this award is due in 60 days, so we are still working through that with all the partners. As we have presented to this body in the past, we've been awarded several categorical grants that have met the staffing needs related to, for example, epidemiology, laboratory services, diversity, as we presented earlier today, immunizations. Therefore, most of the staffing in this grant will be focused on the gaps that have been identified as a result of COVID, and then our public health pipeline efforts, not a direct service per se, is because those grants have addressed that. CDC does have some requirements. They expect that at least 25% of the award be used to support school-based health programs, 40% be used to hire staffing at local health departments, communities, and community-based organizations, and the remaining can be used for our state staffing needs. This award specifically notes that administrative staff are allowable, which is not often the case in many of the grants we get and has been limiting in our other COVID awards, but I cannot underscore the need for these positions. For our division, the gap has been identified specifically in our fiscal and grant management, human resources, policy, staff, and communication. There are a couple metrics that we're required to report on, the first being progress toward meeting our hiring goals over that 2-year period, and then details on the specific roles of those positions. The second one being details on the diversity of staff hired and equity and inclusion activities of those staff. Again, we're expecting much more detailed guidance and templates. We just don't have those quite yet. This award allows for staffing that are permanent, full-time, temporary staff, fellows, interns, and contractors. And we do plan to use a variety of staffing solutions to meet the various needs of our agencies and our partner organizations. In summary, we have a few specific things that we have structured the funding to address. The first being state staffing to ensure timely and accurate fiscal management and compliance with the grant deliverables, state staffing to ensure timely and accurate health data and epidemiology, state and university staffing to support human resources and pipeline efforts, policy support to assist our division accomplish accreditation and analyze public health policy and offer suggestions for improvement, specifically as it relates to our public health administration and authorities, state staffing to support communication efforts specifically focused on our website and public information. We have also included funding for our Nevada system of higher education to focus on academic health departments, and I did speak about this during session. We're also going to be working with our Nevada Association of County Health Officials to provide technical assistance and support for our county boards of health and county commissioners as they develop public health strategies locally. For our health authorities, and that's in Washoe and Clark counties, we've included funding for them to focus on pipeline staffing efforts as well as school-based partnerships. For the remaining counties that fall under the authority of our chief medical officer at the division, this is in the line item noted as around $2.6 million. This is going to fund the development of regional or county health departments. So by way of example, we're working really closely with Churchill County, who's going to be partnering with Mineral County, Pershing County, and Eureka County to develop a public health strategy for those counties, really reflective of regional public health, which would be a great step forward in our state. We also are working with Elko County to assess a county city public health department, which is one option, again, allowed in our NRS and NAC. This funding will primarily go to infrastructure and planning staff to really support the growth of a health department. We also are planning to work with the CDC Foundation, which has been an incredible partner to help us with recruitment and oversight of the staffing that have been hired. We were introduced to the CDC Foundation early in the response, and they have helped us recruit staffing from everything from the Office of Minority Health to senior epidemiologists to medical staff. So they're going to remain a partner for this one as well. I'll just note that the companion work programs for budget account 3223 specifically will be presented at the August IFC meeting. We have requested in that case time ending or intermittent FTEs, as we do want to recruit some staff with state experience and offer promotional pipelines for our state staff as well. And so we look forward to presenting that in a couple months to you. It is difficult to implement a workforce grant that is 2 years in scope, and we understand that, but we are hopeful that this is one that CDC will extend for years to come. That said, the model we are using will be temporary, so we're not going to obligate the state to continue to fund those positions should the should the funding not be there. That concludes my written statements, and Ms. Reynolds and I are happy to take questions that you may have.
Thank you, Ms. Peak. Do we have any questions from the committee on this item? We have Assemblyman Roberts. Go ahead, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And you talked about it briefly, the $2.6 million that are allocated to counties, and you talked about some of the things on our backup document. It didn't have determined, but you covered a little bit of it. What's the timeline, do you think, for that 2.6 for when you'll allocate that? And could you go over a little bit of what you're going to do it for again?
Absolutely. Julia Peak, for the record, thank you for the question, Assemblyman Roberts. So we are in negotiations, as I mentioned. The final grant and work plan are due to the CDC within 60 days. So we're in the process right now of working through that. As I mentioned, we're going to be funding the counties that fall under our chief medical officer. So in Nevada, we're a largely decentralized public health system. And that basically means the bulk of the population are served by Washoe County and Clark County. Every other county falls under the state public health program under the chief medical officer. We've learned that that's not the best model, and our communities in the rural counties have really stepped up to address COVID. And so what this funding is going to be, again, we're negotiating the amount going to each entity as we speak. So hope to have that in the next few weeks so we could get the sub-award out. But one example is working directly with Churchill County, who's partnered with Mineral, Pershing, and Eureka to develop a quad county model. You've seen this model also used by Carson City Health and Human Services, so it's a quasi-regional health department. So it's going to be encouraging that type of development. And also within our statute, it's allowed to have a county and city combination to make a health department. So we're hoping to work with Elko specifically, who's ready and prepared to do that. So again, as far as the exact sub-award, I'm hoping the next few weeks that we can really start as close to July 1st as possible in spending this money and hiring this workforce. But it's going to do really diverse things in our communities.
Thank you very much for the answer, and thank you for the question, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Assemblyman. Do we have any other questions from the committee? I just had one. Did you anticipate having difficulties in finding some of these contract positions, especially in like rural and tribal communities and a little bit further away from population centers?
Thank you so much for the question, Chair. Yes, I mean, hiring workforce is a challenge. I'll say that our partnership with the CDC Foundation has been very fruitful. They certainly have a much better method for recruiting and finding staff. They also offer benefits, a ton of peer learning opportunities. So we hope that by using the CDC Foundation in this regard, the recruitment and retainment of the workforce will be much easier. Under one of our other grants, I'll know we just hired an excellent tribal liaison that the CDC Foundation helped us find and recruit. So we're confident that this is the best opportunity to find the workforce that we need, but certainly workforce grants are really hard. And we remain flexible. If we can't find certain positions, we certainly can go back to the budget and scope and figure out where another gap remains and fill with those funds.
All right, thank you. Thank you. Do we have any other questions or comments on this item from the committee? All right, I see none, so we can take a motion to approve item 126, which is work program C54827. I have a motion from Vice Chair Carlton. I have a second from Senator Dennis. Do I have any discussions on that motion? Seeing none, all in favor, aye. Aye. And we have all ayes on Zoom. Any opposed, nay? And the motion passes unanimously of all the members present. And we can move on to our last agenda items. And our last agenda item, not our last agenda items, but our last items under item G. And those are item 132 and 133. They were coronavirus relief funds work programs, and there's several of those. And we didn't necessarily have any issues associated with them, but I think we wanted just a little bit of clarification on a few of those from Vice Chair Carlton. And so, Vice Chair Carlton, if you wanted to identify which one of those that you were curious about, that would probably get us the appropriate agency to ask the question, answer the question.
And I think this, and thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, for allowing the questions. I think this is more in just to address the actual layout of how these were processed. I go through the document, and there's a budget account description. There's the salaries or contract staff. There's the PPE and equipment. We talked about that. The telework and the second order effects. I think I need to understand what the second order effects are so that when I look at this chart, I truly understand how these dollars are being switched out. And we've come to call this, we're changing the color of money in a certain way because we're able to use dollars to supplement state dollars. So what is the second order of effects? And then if you could elaborate a little bit on how the telework numbers were actually, how you came to those, because those seem to be fairly small, and I know that we had a lot of folks go to working at home, so I'm not sure exactly what those numbers are. So if you could just explain those two items so that I understand this chart a little bit better. Thank you.
Good morning, Leslie Mollenkamp from the Governor's Finance Office. I think I might be able to answer some of those questions just with a brief overview, which will hopefully help as part of the process. What happened is, in line with the CDC guidance and the state emergency directives, the state of Nevada agencies were asked to provide, advise, and prepare plans for the transition from more of a pandemic environment to the resumption of normal activities. And so this included identifying any kind of operational tools that they may need to carry forward through the transition. One of the things that it asked about was COVID-19 related supplies, equipment or personnel costs, as well as any required resources to address any adverse operational effects due to the COVID-19 pandemic. And this would be resources such as temporary staff or contract help essential to address any kind of backlog or productivity issues that might have occurred as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. And so as we gathered the information together, we gathered it initially with a survey, and then at that point in time that was vetted to only identify the most essential needs to be able to move forward. We were originally looking at about 190 budget accounts with $190 million in requests. And what you see before you here today was really only the most essential ones that move forward. I think we have 156 budget accounts that were approved and approximately 21.7 million. So again, I think the area you may be talking about that may be a bit of confusing is any resources that were related to backlog. Those would generally be outside of the norm of, they wouldn't be supplies and equipment necessarily, but they may be contracted staff as well that may be required to assist in any kind of backlog needs.
And thank you very much, Ms. Mullenkamp. So when I look at the chart, and it's the one at the top of the list, it's not like I'm picking it out, it's just the first one. So the AG's office extradition coordinator under second order of effects would be a little over $284,000. So with your explanation, I'm assuming that was to get the backlog of work that was done when extraditions were not allowed to happen, and we're trying to play catch up with these folks. Is that correct?
That is correct. That was one of the few items that didn't fit nicely in a category, so it ended up sort of in this other category, and that was for extraditions as well. Yes, that is correct.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to make sure that as we look at these charts moving forward, we understand what each category is. Thank you, Ms. Mullenkamp.
Thank you, Vice Chair, and thank you, Ms. Mullenkamp. Do we have any other questions from the committee on items 132 and 133? All right, so we'll take a motion to approve item 132 and 133. I have a motion from Vice Chair Carlton. I have a second from Senator Dennis. And any discussion from the committee on that motion? Seeing no discussion from the committee, all in favor, aye. Aye. And if we can go to our members on Zoom. They are all in the affirmative, and any opposed, nay. And motion passes unanimously with the members present. And that wraps up agenda item G and all of the items within the individual items within G. And I think this is an appropriate place for us to take a 30-minute break. We've been at it here for about 3 hours and 45 minutes. We have, I think, a couple of hours left to wrap this up. And let's take a break. It's now 12:45. If we could be back in our seats and logged in and ready to roll at no later than 1:15. And folks who, members of the committee who ordered their food, it's in the conference room. And I will see, we'll take a quick recess and I'll see you back at 1:15.